Perfect. Okay, so if you're kind enough to introduce me, my name is Faizan Ali. I'm an assistant professor, it's equivalent to senior lecturer here in the UK, and a graduate program coordinator at the College of Hospitality and Tourism Leadership, University of South Florida, Sarasota, Manatee. Just came from Florida, very nice weather, sunny, 30 degrees, beaches, all the way to here, although I'm lucky today to have sunlight out in London. A little bit about my background. I got my job at USF in 2016 as an assistant professor. Prior to that, I was at Florida State University as a postdoc. My PhD was from Malaysia, my master's was from UK, I studied in Wales. I'm from Pakistan, so my undergraduate studies were from Pakistan, and so far I have close to 80 publications, including research, journal articles, and conference proceedings. I recently edited a book on research methods, specifically PLS SEM, which we'll talk about later on. And I mainly have worked in hospitality and tourism leadership, tourism industry. My research is mainly focusing on marketing in hospitality and tourism industry. So that's pretty much about me. Some of the other things that I do, I look after graduate programs. So I deal a lot with the graduate students, their thesis, their projects, the research stuff that they do. I don't know, I probably think you will not know what ICRE is, but ICRE is the largest professional body for hospitality and tourism education. They work with different federations. I'm director of research for their Southeast, Central, and Southern America, so it's a bit difficult to remember, but in that role I deal with research related activities for our membership. There's another organization that me and another colleague of mine called Dr. Jihan, we are running. It's called Anahi, which is a non-for-profit, and most of these videos and these things are for that. So it's a non-for-profit. We have more than 6,000 members, people from around the world. So we do all these things for their benefit. No cost involved, no money involved with all of it. In hospitality, we have closely 8 journals that are indexed in SSCI, so top tier journals. I'm involved with 5 of them, either on the editorial board or either in some sort of editorial role with them. As an assistant editor or a coordinating editor, mainly dealing with research methods and stuff like that. And I've conducted these workshops in the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, I've done closely 40 workshops around the world, and I think close to 1,000 people have attended these workshops, which is pretty cool. Because there's always some sort of learning happening. So it's not only me delivering the lectures, but also learning from people sitting in the front and learning from them. All right, so that's about it, okay? Now, obviously, all this background shows a lot of research, and I've used this word a lot, right? Research, this. So I'm going to summarize my experience with research a little bit. Now, there's a disclaimer here. The statements that I'm going to make are purely my own experience. You don't have to generalize them, nothing like that, but purely my own experience. My PhD was from Malaysia, UTM. Now, Malaysia, normally you would not think of Malaysia as a very research productive country or something like that. But just to give you an idea, Malaysia has been consistently the top country in terms of research paper downloads from Emerald, Elsewhere, and Taylors and Francis, which gives you an idea of how much people are involved with research in Malaysia. So there's a lot of stuff happening there. I personally have learned a lot about research in Malaysia because there's so much opportunity to learn things. And then there's a group on Facebook. If you're not a member of this group, I would recommend you to get your membership on this group. It's for free. It's called Doctorate Support Group, but it's not only for doctorate students or anything. There are a lot of professors, assistant professors, associate professors on this group. It mainly talks about research-related things. So not only how to publish and stuff, but also for people who are close to their defenses or people who are struggling with their research or stuff like this. So it's pretty much a support group. Now, This picture, the screenshot is 3 months old. At that time there were 70,000 members. Last night I checked, there are around 76,000 members right now on this group. That's my picture, and if you see there's a badge there which says Conversation Starter. I'm a very active member of this group, and Conversation Starter simply means that things that I post sparks conversation and people do comment and engage with those posts. So if you're not a member, again I would recommend being a member of the group. It's always good to learn something. So that's that. And then Taylor's University is another university in Malaysia. It's one of the best universities in terms of hospitality and tourism in Asia. I worked there for almost a year as a research associate working on a project. So again, all of these things have increased my research caliber and sort of learning about how people conduct research or what do they do or stuff like that. Now, currently I am working with postgraduate students in Pakistan, China, US and Malaysia. It's difficult because these students are from different backgrounds, obviously different levels of research, so it's difficult, but at the same time it's rewarding because it enriches my own experience with these students. So, before I go ahead, I have to ask you people something real quick. Is there anybody who have got a dream company where you want to work, like a place that you really, really want to work at? Yes.
Yes, I do, but I'm not going to tell you where.
Anybody who have got...
My line manager is here, thank you very much.
Use Institute for life.
Yeah, no, I mean just...
Yes.
Anybody who got the courage to say, like, that's the place where I definitely want to work. You don't have to go and work there, it's just like some...
I'll tell you a formal one for me. You know, as British Department for International Development.
Okay.
For many years, my heart was set on working there.
Okay. Apple. Okay, let's take Apple. Everybody knows Apple, okay? Yes, perfect. Now imagine you go to a conference where you know that there are some people, executives from Apple coming there and they're going to talk about their jobs and stuff. Would you be willing to attend those talks? And just listen to how life is at Apple, right? Okay, now imagine you go there and this executive from Apple says like, oh my God, it sucks. I don't know why am I at Apple even. Like, I just can't stand it. What would it do to you?
Rethink my dream.
Right. Now, just hold on this part, okay? I'm going to show you a couple of pictures that I've taken from support groups. Groups that are meant to support people for research, okay?
Yeah.
I feel that. Here is another one.
I've seen that as well, yes.
So we see them, right? They're circulated and all that. And it's fun, it's so much humor watching this. But just think of what I just told you earlier, okay? What does it do? Think about people who are thinking to get into PhD or research or do stuff like that. What's the first thing? They have to go to groups that are meant to support them, to encourage them to get into research life, right? And this is what they see, okay? Now, how many of you have had problems convincing your family or your friends that you are going to get into a PhD? I had. My father was not happy when I told him I'm getting into a PhD. Now he is proud of me. At that time, because my father worked at a bank, he envisioned me as somewhere in a corporate office or whatever. Now he is really proud of me, but at that time he was like, well, I'll go with your decision, but I don't know, you know.
Yeah.
Why it happens? It happens because of stuff like this, you know, it circulates. And then another thing is, before all this started, I was sitting here with a few people, I'm not going to say who those people were, but we were all complaining. We were all complaining about research, about the journals, about the editors, about whatever. But that's what happens, right? Think about your normal life as an academic. When you meet other academics, normally what do we talk about? The problems with our academic system.
Absolutely.
Or our problems with our job or life or research or all that stuff. Now, I understand it has nothing to do with basic mistakes in research methodology, but it's just the base of understanding that research is beautiful, but we taint the picture. And we just convey a wrong message, okay? My motivation of these workshops is pretty much changing this a little bit. Like, it's fun, I love it, okay? I cannot do 9 to 5 job, I just can't. When I was a student in UK, in 3.5 years, I've changed 16 jobs. I actually got a job at Sainsbury. I went to their orientation, they paid me for that orientation, and I didn't go on the first day of my job. Because I just can't do 9 to 5 job. This is love. This is my love, right? I love it. I travel the world and I do my job, which is cool, right? So that's why I'm doing this workshop, just to give that positive image of research and stuff like that. Okay, let's move further. Now, because of stuff like that, which I just showed you, the ultimate picture that's painted in people's head is something like this. Now you can change this paper with anything else, like you can put it as a PhD dissertation or a thesis or research paper or whatever, but it's pretty much like this. People think it's extremely difficult, and it is. I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but it's difficult, but that's what we think, and most of the people give up because of a picture like this, right? You know how many people drop out during their PhD studies because they think they can't do it?
I don't think it's just that, it's just the pressure. I mean, for me, I'm the first graduate of my family, and my father was like, no, you can't. You know, your life is set like this, you get arranged marriage, you have kids at this age, and you know, you're done, your grandmother by 30 or whatever, you know what I mean? So I think just getting onto being a graduate sort of ladder, it was a big thing. But now, my father's is like, with my daughter, he's like, wow, you know, my granddaughter's going to be a doctor. So it's the cultural thing which really stops you, actually, more than, I think, you know, all those sorts and things that are standing in your way, because there is a huge cultural thing saying, God, how many more? Because it's not, you know, people like me at my age, like PhD at this age, why would you want to do it, you know, or something like that. So you've got that kind of thing that stops you, which is far more sort of conditioning than I would say the journey to it.
I completely agree. As I said, I've gone through it, and I completely agree. Even though nobody told me to get married and, you know, arrange marriage and kids and other things. Yeah, there are other things, cultural pressures and this and that, you know. And then there's a time where people compare you, like, look at all your other friends, they're working in banks, they're working in these places, and you're still carrying your bag and going to library and earning nothing, right? So there are a lot of pressures, and I completely agree. These things are a mixture of cultural pressure, social pressure, and other things. Now, I still remember the first week, and I'll just give a shout out to my PhD supervisor. I met him the first week of my PhD, and he told me, if you want to succeed in your PhD, you've got to do 3 things, and you've got to get rid of 3 things. And I was like, okay, tell me the things that I have to get rid of. And he said, get rid of your family, get rid of your social life, and get rid of all entertainment. I was like, oh wow, that's interesting. And I said, okay, what are the 3 things I have to do? And he said, read, read, read. Oh wow, you know, so that's something very interesting, the first week of PhD. Now I appreciate what he told me at that time. But it's pretty much like that. Like, you have all gone through your PhDs or research, and you see that you really have to remove your social life from all of it for 3 to 4 years, right? So yes, this picture is a mix of that social pressure, cultural pressure, and a lot of our perceptions that are somewhat not true, okay? So I've also seen people who won't submit a paper to a journal because they are so scared that they might get rejected. Now, that is no social pressure or cultural pressure. Yes, it's somewhat social pressure looking at other people who get rejected. But I think it's more of a self-rejection. Like, why won't you submit a paper and let the editor reject you, compared to, like, you're sitting in your room and rejecting yourself every day, saying, like, I'm not going to submit a paper because it's going to get rejected, right? So, but regardless of all that discussion, do you think this is true?
Based on my experience, I think this shows a lot of mercy to the truth. I think the truth is a bit harder.
It does.
Yeah.
So we all have gone through it. Okay, so let's go ahead and ask you something. So again, yeah, to your point, as I said, because of all these things, people hate research papers. A lot of people don't even try to get published because of that pressure of, or I would rather say they're frightened of getting rejected or stuff like that, okay? All right, so I am lucky to be in the presence of a lot of researchers, okay? My question to you is, what is research for you?
Research, sorry.
What is
research?
What is research for you? Like, how do you define research?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes.
Process of structure and discovery.
Discovery, okay. What else? Structured discovery, okay. What else? Okay, yeah, you are defending soon, right? So what is research for you?
So research consists of two words, isn't it? Re and search. So you search, you have stuff that you search, and then you research the same thing to find out if there's some differences.
I wish editors think the same, because every time I tell them I researched this thing, they're like, what new did you do?
Exactly.
Yes.
I'll take research from a process perspective. There's a process where we should identify what is the problem, what can I do to address the problem, generate something that you can actually disseminate and share, or find some solution that can actually treat us and get to.
All right, yes.
I would say it in terms of making sense of a problem or an opportunity through some process of discovery. So it's not necessarily anything new per se, but making sense of what's already out there, or trying to read or move things from one domain to another domain.
Right. Okay. You were saying.
Yeah, I have to understand.
Right. So every time I ask this question, I somewhat get the same answer, whether it's UK, US, China, Canada, whatever, wherever I ask the question, it's pretty much the same. It's like discovery, structured, making sense of it, logical, answers, problems, questions, stuff like that, right? So all these words come out whenever I ask this question, and it's pretty much true. The problem is, how do you know you discovered something? Or how do you know that the things that make sense to you make sense to other people as well? Right? Because you do not do research only for yourself. So there's a time where you think that, okay, I found the logical answer to this question, but other people might just look at you and laugh at you. Like, how is that logical? Right? Or something that's structured for you may not be structured for somebody else. Right? Have you guys ever felt a sense of being lost while you're doing your research? Every time, right? Reading papers, like, what am I doing, right? I know people who start searching for something, they end up completely with something else, and that's based on their confusion. Again, to my PhD supervisor who asked me to like read, and I really took it literally what he said, and I really stopped everything and just kept reading. And after a week, I had headache, and I was really painful. So I went to him and I'm like, Doc, you know, I really can't do it. It's like putting me under a lot of pressure. I've read so much in a week. It's painful. And he said, well, it's good for you. I said, how come? So he was like, the day your headache stops, your PhD finishes. And I appreciate what he said. Pretty much was true. So, yes.
But the same experience I had, one of my students said to me the same exactly what you were repeating. He said, I read. And I got a headache and I just gave up. And I said, what were you reading? He said, I was reading a topic. And I went, what are you looking for when you read that topic? He said, I don't know. So it means if you do not know what you're reading for, you're definitely going to get a headache. But if you know what the purpose, what the ideas, what's the problem you're reading for, then you can enjoy the reading. You can then depart from headache and go more onto the fun reading.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Because when I read, I just don't just simply read. I'll first define my objectives. Within the objectives, then I look through the paper, shortlist it and read it and have fun. Do you know what I mean? Otherwise, it's all going backward, forward.
Right. It's a very good point that you bring. So my perspective on this is, now that you have done your PhD and you are at a stage where you're supervising students, you are saying it this way, which makes sense. But imagine a student who walks in and have no idea about research, have no clue about what topic he's going to work on. They have to be in that stage, and that's going to shape them into a good researcher, right? So The opposite side of what you said. So I had a student, and for some reason that student was in love with a word called engagement. Okay? Okay, what do you want to do? I want to do customer engagement. Okay, why? Because I like it. Okay, good, go and read something. Okay, goes and reads, come back. What do you want to do? I want to do customer engagement. So you have learned nothing from the reading that you did. Yeah, I did learn something. What was it? Okay, so I am going to go and look at air passengers. I'm going to look at passenger engagement. Wow. So this student has already made the mind that I'm not going to let go of this word engagement. Now in that case, when you said that, when you know your topic, I gave him an example, and I'm happy that he took that example, and I'm going to say it here. How many of you have skydived before? Anybody? You did?
You did? Oh, wow! Did you like that?
So, I skydive,
Oh my God.
and it's a fun experience. However, every time you dive, the person who is going to train you first is going to tell you that do not hold anything before you jump. Okay? So it's like when, and it's fun. The first time when you dive, there's somebody on your back talking to you about different things, and right before you jump, they say a lot of things that do not make sense, and your brain is processing it, and they push you. Because if your brain is processing the jump, you're not going to jump. Right? So they say a lot of things, and you're like, what? And the next moment you are falling down. Okay. Now imagine for one moment that right before the person jumps, the person is holding the railing or some sort of thing near the door. What would happen to this person? He would die. Because of the pressure, if he's holding something, he's going to hit himself with the plane. Okay? So that's why it's called free fall, where you do not hold anything, you jump and you go down. I look at research pretty much like that. Every time you come with a pre-notion and you're holding one word, it won't let you discover anything because you're so focused on that one word. For students, normally I tell them, go like a free fall. I mean, yes, you should have like, okay, so even this skydive, if somebody comes and say like, I want to dive and do not know if that person wants to dive from the plane or in the pool, or yeah, that makes no sense, right? So the person has to know that I'm diving from the plane or in the pool or I don't know, from the cruise ship, or they have to have some idea, but really do not confine it in something. It produces a good, much better research because now your eyes are open to a lot of different things. That's my take. Now again, research can be different depending on how you feel, but I think if somebody wants to produce good research, they should really do a free fall first.
So there shouldn't be an interest as such in certain areas, is that what you're saying? Because that
Yes.
skydiving fall, I mean, even though I didn't do the job, I felt what you were going through
Yes.
first time.
So there should definitely be an interest, but you shouldn't be, so like engagement, what I said earlier, if you really look into it, it's more like consumer behavior, right? So instead of looking at engagement, I would rather look at consumer behavior, which is a much bigger field. So get into that and see what can I do in it, right? Now, once you really make your, one area is your focus area, which can be engagement, then yes, you can get into engagement, go deeper and try to see what else you can do. But for early career researchers, having one thing and really sticking to it is very dangerous. At least this is what I think. Okay? Alright. So there's a famous quote, and I love it for research, and that is, basic research is what I'm doing when I don't know what I'm doing. Now, you gave me a philosophical answer. Research is 2 words, re and search, and then you search, and then you research, and blah, 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 which is okay. So people get headache, people get confused. It's because sometimes when you're doing it, you have no clue what you're doing. And in my opinion, that's the beauty of research. So if you already know what you are doing, in fact, I saw a funny picture a few days back. and that was, the picture was showing a clerk in a patent office, a copyright office, and he was talking to his boss and saying that it's rubbish, right? Because a lot of people who submit applications for patent are for things that are not discovered, yet they say what are they going to discover. So if they already know what needs to be discovered, it should already be out there. So I think if you already know what you are doing, shouldn't be a research then. So again, that's what I think, I also think that it's completely okay to ask for help, because if you are confused, if you are lost, if you are not sure what you are doing, you really need to seek help. You have to say something? Okay, I just realized, okay. So all of you, during your research or your PhD studies, did you seek for help?
Yeah,
Yes?
many times.
What type of help?
Well, personally, I had a sort of crisis in the first year where my supervisor completely changed, and I don't know if it was my bad luck or good luck in a way. I got the director of research in my university to be my supervisor, but he came from a different area. But he was really helpful, and whenever we were stuck, we would ask for help either from other faculty members or other people from other universities, other academics. Because my research was quantitative as well, my supervisor was into qual, we had to bring someone else into the team who was from quantitative background. So I was actually very lucky to have Nick Braidakis, who was a professor at Cambridge University, to be my second supervisor. As I moved on, I got more help in terms of the research methods. So when I reached that stage, I attended a few workshops and training sessions. By the third year, I got the help in a different way. So I attended some of the PhD consortiums, and I presented my research, and I got feedback and sort of grilling sessions that we've done a similar thing for Achieva this week as well. So that was really helpful as well in terms of preparing me for the Viva. For the data collection as well, I asked for help from people in the 3 countries that I was collecting the data from, because it wasn't easy for me to travel there and collect the data face to face. So to be honest, from the beginning to end, I mean, when I was writing my acknowledgement, it's an endless list of people that I could have thanked there. But the thing is, I never felt shy to ask, and in reality, really, I got so much help that more than I asked for.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So I second it. It's important to ask for help, and the logic behind this is nobody is perfect. Like, okay, I might be good at research methods, but I am really terrible at details. I just can't stand them. I can write a paper, but I can't put the list of references together.
Oh.
I just can't do it. It's just not my thing. So it's important to understand what you are good at, what you are not good at, and then you should make a team where you know that who is good at what, so you can ask help, right? And that's where collaborations come into the picture. Now, whenever I say it's okay to ask for help, it's also important to know what to ask. Now, being a very active member of groups and things, and every day I get like, I don't know, tons of messages about things that people do not understand. Most of them I answer. A lot of them I cannot answer because the questions are so weird that I don't know how to answer them. Like, I have got a question where somebody asked me, give me a topic for my PhD. Like, how am I supposed to give you a topic for PhD? I even got a person who asked me, give me a topic for my master's thesis, and I was like, what's your area? And it was molecular biology or something. Like, okay, how am I supposed to do that? Like, okay, so yes, it's okay, because every time I post something, I say, if you need any help, let me know. And now that's not the help that I can give, right? So it's okay to ask for help, but it's important. And then sometimes if I do not answer to questions like this, people emotionally blackmail me. People like, oh my God, you're so rude. Okay, so how do I answer that, right? Or sometimes people even have cursed me about things that I do not know how to answer. So every time you want to ask for help, it's important to understand that there are other people who are busy. Nobody is sitting for free. So you should appreciate and respect their time as well. But asking for help, so it's completely okay. sometimes what happens is, in research, there's this culture of collaboration and stuff like that, right? Here I would just say from my own experience, every time you help somebody, if you are helping somebody, it's important to put your expectations out there. Like, I help people, but at the same time, I do not want to make myself a jack of all trades. Like, I don't want my name on all types of research papers. I just can't. I'm hospitality and tourism and marketing, and that's my area. So if I'm going to help somebody, I can help a lot of people, but if somebody is coming to me from this area, I can help them much more and work collaboratively with those people. At the same time, if somebody from HR or organizational behavior or accounting or some other discipline reaches out, I do help them, but I also make it clear that I'm not going to help you by spoon feeding, and you also do not have to add my name, or you don't have to give me any credit, or it's all good. However, when it's my area, and now again, this is tricky. So if somebody reaches out to me from hospitality and tourism and say, what type of journal would you recommend me? And if I have just to tell them what journal, I'm not going to ask them to put my name on the paper just because I told them what journal to submit, right? So it also depends. So that's why it's important to put out your expectations and see how you want to work with people. Okay, now going forward, is there anybody in this room who like cats? All right, you like cats, you like cats. Why do you like cats? What? Why do you like cats?
It's not like a problem.
Is there any particular reason, like you like cats, or you?
They eat mice. They eat mice and get rid of mice.
They're cute.
I think people like cats because they like the challenge. Cats are very different to dogs.
Yes.
They're very for themselves, and most cat owners I've spoken to are intrigued by the way that cats are so smart, but also in many ways so selfish. The love can be great, but it's very conditional. So,
Yeah.
I think people like being on the edge.
Do you have a cat?
No, I
Okay.
that's why.
Where I come from, in my culture, we're born to detest and run away from cats because they're a sign of bad luck.
Oh.
So if a cat is the first thing you see in the morning,
All types of cats.
Yeah.
if a cat is the first thing you see in the morning, get down on your knees.
Really?
Say a prayer.
Alright, why do you like cats?
They're funny and they're so different. And they little, I always think like these little predators, and I often think, why does a human being choose to live with a little predator? But they've got different fangs, they play games, they talk to you. When you're sad, they come and sit with you. Yeah, they're very entertaining and stimulating.
It's entertaining. Okay, so here's the thing, okay? Based on research again, people who like cats, like people who have kept cats as pets and who like cats, most of them like them when the cats are smaller. The older the cat grows, the less the love gets. Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because like what you said, cats are interesting, they're entertaining, they play games. The older the cats grow, the less that tendency becomes of curiosity, of playing, of jumping around, of scratching remains the same. Curiosity goes down for the cats. Yeah, now imagine if I leave a cat in this room, what the cat's going to do versus a dog. So the cat's going to jump around, go from here to there, see all these things. So one trait that makes cats very interesting is curiosity, right? So if you want to be a good researcher, you need to be like a cat.
Young cat.
Young cat, like a kitten.
Yeah, but even the old cats.
Yeah, but the curiosity goes down with the age. Or maybe you got a super cat. So, alright, going ahead. Now when I say you have to be like a cat, I do not mean you should steal milk or you should chase mice, jump around, scratch things. Do not do that. Just take the curiosity of the cat. Now this is my favorite definition of research, which is research as formalized curiosity. So curiosity is interesting, but it has to be formalized, or like what you said, structured observations or discovery or stuff like that. Now poking and prying is also interesting. I like them a lot. Poking, just imagine I go to one of these underground trains and I poke a person sitting next to me. What would this person do? Probably nothing.
Poke you back.
If it's Facebook, yes. Probably the first time the person might not do anything other than stare at me. I poke the person again after he turns his face. The third time I might not have my teeth, right? It can happen. That's research, right? So imagine there's a person or a kid who has no clue of what happens when you poke people. So if this person go and starts poking after the third or fourth try, the person is going to know that if you poke for no reason, you're going to get punched, right? That's what research is. So you start poking out of curiosity because you didn't know what happens if you poke people. But that poking was formalized because you kept doing it and waiting for what's going to happen after a certain point, right? That's pretty much what research is. So you have to be consistent on what you are looking for, but the curiosity needs to be there. Okay? Again, this is my favorite definition. So you can, have another definition, but I thought that one was very basic and interesting. Now, okay, a question for all of you. What is the most difficult or most important part of research that you conduct?
Getting the story right. I think that's one of the key areas, and I have to say it's something that I'm still learning.
Okay.
But yeah, I think getting the story right, for maybe the first time you start to publish, it takes a very long time to get the paper out. But then after a year or so, it just becomes part of the system.
Okay.
It's just easy. But the story itself, that's also what attracts
All right.
editors.
So what you are telling me is more about publication, right? When you want to publish something.
Yeah.
My question is more about research, like in general, the research process, the whole thing. What's the most difficult or important part of it?
Data. It's all about
Data
data.
collection.
Data? Okay. Perhaps.
To start.
To start.
Oh, bless.
Question. Okay. Yes.
When there's nobody to talk to.
When there's nobody to talk to,
My students say finding a topic.
finding a topic. Okay. All right. So let's just continue with this. Okay. So I got like 5 or 6 answers. Data. When there's nobody to talk to, which is more about your respondents or data, I would just put it
No, it's
together.
fellow researchers.
Yeah. And then you said finding the topic and stuff. In my opinion, all these things are more about your research design. How do you design your research, right? Other things come later on. So finding your respondents, or finding the data, or finding the real thing that you want to work on, it's more about research design. And that's what it is. The most important, as well as the most difficult part of your research is the research design. Design your research perfectly. And here's where most of the mistakes happen, okay? Now, I am by no means a qualitative researcher, but I love to talk. And that's why I'm starting my talk right now. Like, so far, it was more of a background or introduction or whatever. But I hope that there was something valuable in there. Now, recently I talked at one place and there was somebody in the group who told me that, why are you even telling me about mistakes in research? And I was like, what do you mean? And this person said that because I've published so much, I think it's an instinct for me to conduct research. I thought about it and I thought, okay, yeah, with experience you get better, okay? And I'm pretty sure everybody of you is experienced in this room in terms of research, right? So here's a small game that I want to play with you guys. I want you to look at this and tell me what errors do you find.
Wow. One, a great big.
Yeah, you need to tell me. You need to tell me, okay? Okay.
EU.
Oops.
Oh,
And the error spelling.
spelling.
Yeah, just can you?
That you.
Okay.
If I is capital,
Errors.
Errors. Believe. Believe errors.
Then study,
Study. Read.
read.
Okay.
to take a look to
Which one?
that's right.
If I is capital should be.
Yeah, but that one is not an error. That's like a grammatical mistake.
I think everything is correct.
Okay.
I mean, you can understand it.
It makes sense, yeah.
You can read it.
What?
You can read it.
You
but
can, yes.
you can understand it. You can read
Okay.
it, but you can.
I'll tell you why did we play this game. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. First of all, if you look at this paragraph, it says you may not believe there are 6 errors in this short paragraph. We never talked about the title.
Oh, there aren't 6 paragraphs, are there?
It's only asking you to look at the errors in the paragraph, not the title.
There's 7.
Yet, we still look at the title and find the errors there. Okay? Now, if you look at the paragraph, you may not believe there are 6 errors in the short paragraph. So, even if you look at the paragraph, there are 4 errors. Right? Does it ring any bell?
You may not believe there is.
But there's another error then. Because it says the 6 is an error.
Yeah, there are not 6
There
errors.
are more.
So, there are 5 errors actually, so that's the 5th one. And then you may not believe is another error, which is in terms of the writing. Now, why do we play this game? It's because sometimes even you're so experienced, you may miss some details. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. Sometimes you are early career researchers, you can get the things right. Sometimes you're extremely experienced and you can get the things wrong. So just because you're experienced doesn't mean that you should not pay attention to stuff that's happening. Another thing is, the world is changing, okay? Recently, I gave a phone to my father, which was a smartphone. So he was talking to my younger sister and she said something. My father came to me and said, "What did your sister write?" And I said, "What is it?" And it was this.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So my father was, "What is this?" And I said, "It means laugh out loud." And it's used when people feel it's too funny. So he asked me something and it was, "Does it mean your sister is really laughing there?" I said, "I have no clue, but probably not." Because it's just chat and she just wrote LOL, it doesn't mean she has to laugh there. So he was like, "But how is it possible? Like if she is saying laugh out loud, it means she should be laughing there, right?" Now, why I'm telling you this story is that as intelligent as my father is, it gets him time to understand smart technology. And why? Because it's happening now, right? I think I would be the same 40 years later about the technology that's at that time, right? Does it mean I'm not intelligent? No, it doesn't mean that. It simply means that things evolve and you have to change yourself with those things. So while we all were studying for our PhDs, like my PhD finished in 2015, so it was somewhat recent, but imagine somebody who finished a PhD in 1980s or 90s, things have changed since then. So we all have to update ourselves with those changes, right? And that's why these type of workshops are important, where you see how research methods have evolved. Okay, let's go ahead and see some other stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is more about what is sound methodology, because unless we understand that, it's useless to talk about what mistakes do we make. Current state of marketing research. Now again, this is just to give you an idea, but you do not have to stick with marketing only. Some methodological issues and some guidelines on how not to make those mistakes, or what do you do if you are in that type of a situation, okay? Alright, so this one, because you all told me your names and even though I do not remember them yet, but I understand that everybody is from different discipline. So if some of you can actually tell me something about these two, it would really help me. So randomly, you know, anybody who has not talked so far.
We should start.
How about you?
Yeah, it was probably just a commitment to, because I was not well, I was struggling to walk in the morning, but I just came to attend the talk. Maybe that was the commitment. I want to do something on that. I want to learn a bit more.
Do you have any problems in general with research methods?
What kind of problem?
Like, do you have anything that you think should be fixed or you should know more about it?
Not really, I think I understand the meaning. Yeah, not really, I think I'm okay with that. Probably I'm struggling with the time. I don't have enough time to actually go and put that. Because it's just 24 hours you have in a day, and I think I'm working for 26 hours and 24 hours. So it's just kind of that thing. I'm not saying that it's, yeah, so.
Okay. All right, anybody who have got any fears with research methods? So yes.
What? Well,
Right, there's this very nasty reviewer that's sitting on my paper, and the editor seems to agree with this reviewer that I have an issue of validity, qualitative study.
Reviewers are nasty, especially
I've
reviewers are
threatened to withdraw the paper because I've told him I will not be bullied by this reviewer.
Why is it that the second reviewer always have a problem? Reviewer number 2.
I think there is what you call the zone of comfort, or the comfort zone.
Yeah.
So if you are not within that field, that electronic field of that comfort zone.
Right. Just to comment, I'm coming back, okay, just give me a minute. Just to comment on this, I completely agree that sometimes when we have to get out of our comfort zone, it's not easy and it's not comfortable. It's just difficult, right? But being researchers, I think it's important that at times we should go out of our comfort zone. Like this conference I just attended, TTRA, it's a tourism conference, but it's the first time I came to a European conference and I was shocked. Everything is so different compared to American conferences. Again, just to give you an idea, most of the research in the US is quantitative. This is all qualitative. And I had to listen to editors who actually criticized the methods that I use, and they were like, these methods make no sense. And we reject papers with these methods and stuff like this. So it's difficult to accept that, but at the same time I appreciate it because it gives me an opportunity to look at things from another perspective, right? It's important. Yes, you were saying.
Yeah, I think because you mentioned that people, they have different sort of experience, exposure. So sometimes I think that you manage to do something on some sort of research, and then you say other people will probably laugh and that's what you're trying to find out, right? We already know this, but of course there is something that I don't know. I want to discover. Many other people, they probably know that. So this sort of thing, many times I'm just working on my research because I think, whether should I go for it or should I not? Maybe it's something very common. Even we don't really find a lot of materials of that, but it's just a thing that people work at different levels. They have different sort of theories.
Right. I mean, we all go through that, right? And especially now that education is getting much more common, people are going in, I don't know, all types of PhDs. Sometimes I even don't know what does that mean, but somebody has a PhD, I don't know what, no clue. And again, people from hard sciences sometimes have difficulty understanding. Like, I was in a taxi once and the taxi driver asked me, what do you do? And I said, I'm a professor. And he was like, okay, oh, did you have your PhD? And I said, yes. And he said, what is your PhD in? And I said, marketing. And he said, really? Is there a PhD in marketing as well? I was offended. But at the same time, it's what it is. I mean, there are so many fields that people are in all types of things. So it's completely understandable. Sometimes people have a laugh at you saying like, what are you doing? It makes no sense. Like, there are people who are working in biology labs making medicines for cancer and this and that, and at the same time I'm sitting here and saying what do people eat in restaurants, right? So when you compare them, it's difficult, but again, I appreciate what I do because I still feel that it makes some sort of difference. Imagine how restaurants or hotels were 100 years ago and where do they come now. It's based on research, so you have done research to change things. It's not completely useless, right? So, okay, sound methodology. Now, you know what these things are?
Prediction of future.
Prediction of future, magic, fortune tellers, and this. Anybody experience something like this? Has anybody ever experienced these things?
Experience as in...
Did you go to any fortune teller or magician or?
Once, but I ended up laughing at that.
Okay. How many of you think it's a science?
Rocket science.
Astrology.
It depends on which.
Yeah, what's your thinking on it? Is it a science?
It's not science, no, but it's logic.
Okay.
Maybe it's an art.
Okay. Do you know there are PhDs in palm reading?
I know, yeah. I know someone who graduated.
Right.
He got, oh god.
You graduate to read palms. Yeah. There are degrees in palm reading.
And he's not always
Okay.
right, 50-50.
Now, you are completely right. There's a logic behind it. There's definitely something behind it, but you will never come across anybody like this who will tell you 100% something is going to happen with you, and that person is sure 100%. Why? Because nobody can be 100% sure. So now, if you're not 100% sure for testing and retesting your claims, how is it a science? It's not. Then it becomes an art, right? So it's something that's really confusing. That okay, you follow a set of procedures to do something, which makes it more scientific, but at the same time, you cannot test it. So it's not a science. So what it is, right? So there's a term called pseudoscience, which is a science, but it's a pseudoscience. So it makes both the groups happy, right? So people who think it's a science, they get happy because it's a science. People who think it's not a science, they get happy because it's a pseudoscience.
You put education as a pseudoscience.
No, experiments, thinking, all those things are not pseudoscience. It's just that one word. It's on top of all these things. So, the reason why it's pseudoscience is because, again, it cannot be tested. Now, sometimes, like Nimidi, you said that in your culture, your name was Nimdi, right? Namdi, yeah. Namdi, you said in your culture, cats are considered bad.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, okay.
Certain black ones.
Yes. Even in our culture, in our culture it's the same. So if there's a black cat across your path, you normally,
It's bad luck.
it's a bad luck, right? Okay. Now, do you think there's a scientific experiment behind this saying?
Oh yes, the science is witchcraft.
No.
That's what pseudoscience is.
Right. So these are the things that are passed on to us by generations, generation after generation. People follow it, people sometimes believe in it, but it's not scientifically tested, or otherwise people are going to catch all the black cats and make them cross paths and then see what's going to happen next to you. So it doesn't happen that way. So those are the things where we make some claims based on almost no evidence. Like if somebody is reading my palm, obviously they say I'm looking at the lines and then say something, but there's no evidence to it, right? How would you say if the line is straight, it's going to make you straight, or if the line is not straight, you are not straight? I don't know. But those are the things which are based on almost no evidence. We normally accept them as a fact, like what Nandi said, and in even our culture, if a black cat cross your path, it's bad luck. It's sort of a fact because people really believe in it. Okay, but again, it's mainly like a story that's being passed on from generations after generations, right?
Many people also are scared of blackbirds and crows.
Yes.
It's a similar thing.
Yes.
Is it the color?
So it's more about the color, but again, when it comes to color, it's interesting because there are countries where people use black color for mourning, right? If somebody dies, then but then there are also parties where you are required to wear black clothes.
Yeah.
So I just cannot get it, like why I have to go to a party wearing a black coat when it's a symbol of mourning.
Okay.
So it's part of culture. It's just something that cannot be tested, but it is what it is. So that's one side of the scale. On the complete opposite side, we have some scientific method. Okay. So normally, scientific method is the the base of it or the heart of it would be sound methodology. So if you claim that something is based on scientific method, you have to look at the methodology of that thing. Now, I am based in Florida. I'm sure a lot of you would know who Donald Trump is, right? I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump, but when Donald Trump was running for elections, many people didn't like him, but at the same time there were a lot of surveys and things coming out saying that he has a lot of popularity, right? So every time a survey like this would come out on news channels or things like media, and the media people would claim like, okay, Donald Trump has a popularity of 55% or 60%. The next thing would be, okay, so let's look at the methodology of this survey, because how about if they only conducted the survey in places where there's more Republican support, right? So every time, no matter what, you talk about scientific stuff, the first thing people are going to question about is the methodology. So that's the real heart of it, sound methodology. What do we mean by sound methodology? It's actually a process. It's a whole process which starts with observation, goes to the conclusion. Now, if you remember the definition that I gave you in the start about the cats and poking and prying and all that stuff, it's all observation. You observe things and then you get an idea about, let's look into it further, right? So observe things, you make some assumptions or hypotheses, you do an experiment where you keep doing it again and again in different ways, collect your data, analyze it, and then make a conclusion whether your assumptions were right or not right, right? And if your assumptions were right, then it becomes more like a scientific claim. If it's not right, still it's a scientific claim saying that it's not right, but then you're opening a door for future researchers to look into it, why it's not right, or what are the things that we can add into it to make it right. You know? So that's how research goes on. Now, in this one, if you look at this whole thing, the center of it is actually experiment and data analysis. Every time we talk about scientific method, it's about empirical evidence. You have to have some sort of an evidence. There was an interesting research done, and that was on media, especially when you look at something. So let's say if I come to this room and all of you are sitting here, and I tell you, every morning you should have a shot of vodka. Many people are going to laugh at me, right? But if I tell you there's a research done by American, I don't know, Heart Association or whatever, it says that people who have a shot of vodka have 60% more chance of having a productive day compared to people who do not have it. Many people are going to be very happy, okay? It's like, oh wow, yeah, this makes sense, right? And that's why every time you see something weird coming on news or media, they put something like it's according to research by, I don't know, ABC Institute or whatever. So people tend to believe more when you put a scientific claim to it, like it's based on some sort of research, okay? Now earlier I did this trick when I told you there's a research which says that older cats are better than, younger cats are better than old. There's no research on that. Really, there's no research, but when people say something like this, others tend to believe more compared to if you do not say anything like that. So every time sound methodology, scientific method, what we have at really the center of it is the empirical evidence. And what do we mean by empirical evidence is things that are observable, things that you can observe, things that you can measure, and things that you can test again and again. And that's why most of the publishers now are actually asking if you have your data set to provide that data set with your papers, so that people can retest it and see if it's really something that they can do. Every time I submit a paper, and if I do not put details in my methodology section about how did I collect data, people ask me, like, provide more details about how did you collect data. Now some journals are even asking you, like, what are the months where you collected data? Like, what is the season where you collected data? Because sometimes, where I live, I'm going to come to you, where I live, 6 months it's completely different from the other 6 months. Sarasota is all beaches. So during the winter, we have all people from UK, Germany, Canada, all the northern states, because they want to come there to spend their winters as a summer. And the summer months are completely nobody on street. So if I have to conduct a research in winter, I'll have more people who are from abroad and stuff like that. So listen, wait a minute, Ami had a question.
just on empirical evidence, this is a very hot issue now in international business. Yeah? So you have this focus on what you're saying, empirical evidence. But if you're looking at some phenomena that is very dynamic and is changing very fast, and if you're looking into an environment where the traditional assumptions do not apply, I'm thinking of certain emerging markets. I'm thinking of certain places where things are happening in a different way, a different pattern. It can be quite challenging to having this conversation about empirical evidence to a journalist who isn't necessarily aware of the dynamics of how things are taking place on the ground. If you look at something like the dynamics of innovation in sub-Saharan Africa, or East Africa, in international business, it would be very different from it to those that have been into that region. And I think that makes it difficult when we talk about empirical evidence in this very fast-changing environment.
Right. I completely agree. Okay. Now, I was going to talk about it later on in my slides, which I'll definitely touch upon. And that's exactly what I was saying, that now when you write your methodology section, people are asking you questions about the context of the study or the whole environment, just to understand it better. Only the fact that I've collected data from 400 people is not going to help it, because you really have to understand who are those people, when did you approach them. Journals are now even asking to put if you have provided incentives or not, because if you provide incentives, you are giving an additional motivation for people to fill in the questionnaire, right? So here, the empirical evidence simply means that if you are claiming something, it should have some sort of an evidence behind it. You just can't make a claim. Now later what I will talk about is what type of empirical evidence should you have. That's a separate topic that we will talk about. Okay? Yes, somebody was asking a question here.
No, regarding the sound methodology, I know you picked up through experiments. Is there a particular reason of picking that tool, or could it be anything within the non-parametric?
Yes, this experiment is not like experiment and research method. This experiment simply means you collect data and see what happens and stuff like that. So it can be parametric, it can be anything, observation, focus groups, interviews, surveys, anything. So here the experiment is really the experiment word, not the method experiment, okay? And Nisri, you had a question?
Yeah, is it possible that maybe because you're in the field of tourism, so they would ask more, I don't know, possibly ask more about the time of the year or the season? It happens with us as well in IS research, but they mainly focus on the year. So far I haven't been asked during the
so obviously,
on months of the
right. So here's the thing. I just explained here that normally these questions are to understand the context of the research. So because I'm in tourism, it's important to understand the season, right? And in your case, yes. I mean, why would you talk about season in terms of IS, right? But in IS, more and more people are going to ask you about the devices that were used to collect data, or like did you?
If it's online, or
yes, I do it. Like if I say I've done an electronic survey, people actually ask me whether you use a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop, because if it's a smartphone, people have to spend more focus on really a small screen size and stuff, which impacts the way they respond to your question, right? Or if you are doing a survey on, let's say, organizational behavior, then the question would be, what type of people did you approach? Top level, middle level managers, really frontline employees, what type? So those questions are really depending on the context of your study, you know, so just to understand how it was.
Yes, I just want to add the same thing. If you talk about the context, and it is important, because if I am conducting any sort of study in Pakistan, and that suppose it is on the debt financing, then definitely if you talk about the market, the financial markets, they are more developed in the Western countries as compared to Pakistan are to different other countries where the financial markets are not very, you can say, established. So definitely context has some sort of effect, and we are catering by adding different type of variables to see the impact of that.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, it is important that if let's suppose someone has conducted a study in UK, then you can, or I have seen that different people have conducted a similar type of study in different other countries, because there are different variables, there are different cultural differences. So they come up with totally different results.
Exactly. And culture is important. It's also important for generalizability of your study. So sometimes what happens is, let's say if you are conducting a study on information technology and stuff, you would see that most of your demographics are younger compared to, you know, something like this. And then again, I recently looked at a study where it was about driving safety conditions or something in some country in Middle East, and then there was 94 or 95% of the respondents were male. Now normally if you do this with any other study, people are going to say like, what type of a sample is that? But then you have to also understand the culture, that most of the people who drive there are male, so it makes more sense, right? That's why those things are important to understand the context of the study. Alright, let's move further. Alright, so let me give you an example of how these things work. So how many of you have heard this thing where it says an apple a day keeps a doctor away? Have you heard of it? When I was small, my mother used to tell me this every day because I didn't like apples, and she was like, eat this apple, it's going to keep the doctor away, right? It's interesting, right? We all hear this, and it's across cultures, everybody says this. So if you really take it literally, it would mean something like this. You throw an apple towards the doctor is going to keep away, not going to come close to you. But we are all researchers, so if we have to convert this statement of an apple a day keeps the doctor away into scientific way of looking into it, what would it be? So we have to create an hypothesis which would be pretty much eating an apple every day will keep the doctor away, right? The first thing you have to do is understand what your variables are here, right? So variables can be things that are measurable, testable, observable, stuff like that. Here, there are two things that are observable. One is the apple, of course, and the other one is doctor's office, right? Those things you can observe. So those are the things that we do. The first step would be to operationalize them, which means how are you going to measure them? Because you have to measure them in order to collect data and then use that data to, you know, see if it really works or not. So here the apple was, there was apple, there was doctor's office. If I have to really measure the apple, I have to see the size of the apple, right? Because if, let's say, you are eating a very small apple every day, and she's eating a very big apple every day, it will have different impact, right? So it's not only one apple, but also the size of the apple, because apples are different in size. It also depends on the season where the apple was produced. So for example, in China, you go any time of the year and you will find all types of fruits, because most of the fruits are not really organically or naturally grown, but grown under, you know, this artificial things and whatever. So now if you pick up that apple versus an apple that was organically or naturally grown, obviously the nutrition is very different. So eating that apple versus this apple will also have an impact on the dependent variable, right? It's very important first to operationalize the variables, and that is how do you define them? How do you measure them? So when I was in the UK, I had a job, and my job was, at that time, I was working at Morrison's warehouse where I had to pack apples. And I realized that most of the apples from the same kind tend to be similar in terms of weight and size. So Honeycrisp apple is pretty much the same when you pick it up. It's same in terms of weight, same in terms of size and stuff. And obviously they are coming from the same producer, so it's pretty much the same. So here, if I have to do it, I would rather say eating one Honeycrisp apple will lower your blood pressure, which would reduce your visit to the doctor's office in a year, right? So it makes more sense. Now you are explaining the same sentence much more in detail, where we have more measurable items in there, right? So you can collect data about the Honeycrisp apple, you can obviously collect data about the blood pressure and how many times you visit the doctor, right? Once we have this, we go ahead and we pick up a method. So this is where I added experiment, but this method can be anything. You can observe people who eat apples and see what happens to them. You can conduct a survey of people who eat apples. Do they go to doctor very often or not? You can pick up a case study where I can pick up one person, let's say Miss Rina, I feed her apples every day and see what happens to her. So that's my case study. And then I can do also experiment where I change the type of apple or gave her versus what's the blood pressure and stuff like this, more experiment. So we do all of this. Now again, this depends on your research aim, your context of your study, and how did you define the variables, which it all depends on that. Once done, I collect my data, analyze it, and make a conclusion. So if your conclusion really shows that yes, since you ate an apple every day, you didn't go to the doctor, then yes, the statement is right. But if you realize that despite eating an apple, you had to go to the doctor, then either there's something wrong with the apple or something wrong with you. So then you have to go further and check what's wrong with the apple or what's wrong with you, which furthers the research, right?
There's also a problem. Keep the doctor away, does it mean just that you won't get as many colds, or is it a physical doctor's visit? And if you live in the countryside, then how on earth would you get to the doctor?
Exactly, so that's what I said. That's where you define it according to your study. So this is just an example, right? You can put it like that. Now, it can really be why you go to doctor a lot. You know, so if somebody has a heart disease, goes to the doctor, they probably have nothing to do with an apple. It's a completely different thing. So here's where you really need to define according to your study, which I'm going to talk about later. Why is it so important to spend more time during your literature review, and what does it impact when you define your variables? Okay. All right. So this one probably won't be very important for a lot of you, but I'm just going to say this just to give you an idea of what marketing research looks like. Okay, so this study was done, looked at all the marketing research, hospitality marketing research published from 2000 to 2009. What's interesting is that if you look, 84% of research is empirical in nature, so just 16% is conceptual or new development, right? Most of it, 84% is empirical. And then if you look at even in empirical, because it can be qualitative or quantitative, 71% of it is quantitative. And then if you look at the type of data collection, 50% of research uses surveys or primary survey method. We'll go to people, ask them to fill the questionnaire. And then if you look at the methods, what type of method do you use to analyze your data, it's interesting. It's almost 66% quantitative methods. 34% is qualitative, but even if you look in this qualitative, it's descriptives and content analysis. So this 34% is also not pure qualitative, it also has some quantitative. So that's one. Then this one is another study done on tourism, which look at all the papers published in the, I don't know, 10 years or something. So they divided all the papers into 5 different clusters, right? So some of the papers were about concepts, some of them were about structural frameworks like modeling, some of them were about empirical generalization, strategic principles, and research methods. Now conceptual papers are 33% quantitative. It makes more sense because it's conceptual papers.
Sorry, could you just explain what you mean with conceptual papers?
Okay, so there are certain papers where the paper's focus is more on clarifying concepts. Okay, then this one is papers where they are joining the concepts to make it into a framework. This one is where you're picking up a framework and generalizing it, testing it in another context and see. So there are papers on different things, right? Like my papers are mainly either structural frameworks or empirical generalizations. I do not do a lot of conceptual papers because in my field it's difficult to do conceptual papers. Research, and this one is mainly about the basics of the discipline, which is more about strategic things. And then this one is more about research methods, papers done on developing research methods and stuff. So if you look, this one is 33% quantitative, 64% quantitative, 87% quantitative, 100% and 100%. So again in my field, I conclude that most of the research is quantitative in nature. It's based on empirical data and people use surveys to collect data, okay? So later when I'm talking more about problems or mistakes in research, it would be mainly focusing on these things, like what mistakes people make in quantitative research, empirical data, and surveys. Now again, by no means, if you're a qualitative research, it doesn't mean that there's nothing for you, because a lot of stuff that I'm going to talk about also applies to qualitative research, okay? Alright, any questions so far? Okay, we are short of time actually. Okay, so this one doesn't matter a lot. Alright, so based on my own experience of dealing with research and books and special issues and journal articles and blah blah blah, here are the three main groups of mistakes that people make. Okay, so one of them is theory and design. So problems with theory, problems with its design. The other one is problems with measurement, how do you measure your variables, and the third one is about analysis of data. Okay, so let's go into the first one, which is more about theory and design. So theory is the base of every research that you do. You have to have a theory in research, right? Now the first problem, the first major problem with this is having a weak theoretical base for your hypothesis. So earlier, I said apple a day keeps the doctor away. That's a hypothesis that I'm assuming that if you eat an apple every day, you're not going to go to the doctor very often. That's a hypothesis, but that hypothesis should be based on something. So whoever said this may have looked at the nutrients of apple and then the body autonomy and I don't know whatever, but there has to be a theory behind everything you say. If there's no theory, then it's more like a pseudoscience, where you are just saying things but there's no evidence, you cannot prove it or whatever. So most of the times, and even for you people, when you get a reviewer's comments back, this is a very common thing where it says that there's a need for stronger theoretical foundation or there's a need for stronger theoretical justification for whatever you are doing, right? Because many people, when they are doing their research, they completely ignore the theory, which is important because if you do not have a theory, you cannot build upon anything, okay? What does it mean? So very simple. A lot of marketing and psychology research is about how people behave, right? So my research is mainly about consumer behavior, which means how people behave, okay? So let's say, it's very simple. Why are you people here today? It's a behavior, right? You took your time to be here, which is a behavior. So if I have to understand what brings you here, I have to ask you this, right? And you'll tell me that, okay, there was certain thing that made me come here. So for instance, if Nisreen, she will tell me that I saw you presenting this somewhere else and I thought it would be helpful for this audience, so I brought you here and I came here to listen to you, right? Now, exactly the same thing, if I have to put it in a theory, there's a very famous theory in psychology which is called SOR. S stands for stimulus, O stands for organism, R stands for response. And the theory actually stems from a very simple phenomena. If I have a candle lit here and I ask you to touch the flame of the candle, what's going to happen to you? Or what are you going to do? You either are going to shout or you are going to put your hand away, right? So in this case, flame is the stimulus. As soon as you touch it, it gives your brain a signal that it's hot. And then as a response, you remove your finger or you shout or whatever. So most of the consumer behavior, if you look at it, it stems from this SOR theory. So in that case, you watching my video was more of a stimulus that stimulated an urge in you to bring me here, and right? And as a response, you are sitting here listening to me. So that's how you attach theory to any phenomena that you want to explain. That's one example. Obviously, you are from different disciplines, so you have to think about which theories are very prominent in your discipline and how you can work around them. The second mistake that people make is the disconnect between theory, questions, and methods. So you have a theory that you picked up. Now you have to have your research question, and then you have to have methods to support or answer your research questions. All of them should be aligned. But this is a mistake which is very common where people forget to align these three things together. Again, I'm going to give you an example. So there's a famous theory called self-qual. Again, it's self-qual, right? It's in marketing, which simply means how do you assess quality of services? Okay, so for instance, you are in Bloomsbury Institute, which is a service institute, right? You provide services. So if you have to ask your students what do they think about the quality of the services here, you can actually use this surf call to do that. Okay, it's a questionnaire, a lot of questions. There are 5 different dimensions, which is reliability, responsiveness, empathy, assurance, and tangibles. Now, this is part of Bloomsbury Institute, right? And this is an academic institute. That's why you have this screen, you have these tables, you have all these tangibles to give a good idea to people. It's a good service institute. Then, of course, if somebody has to come here and study here, they have to reach out to some of you and you have to respond back. Imagine you are responding to those people after a month. What type of signal you are giving? Normally you would be very quick in responding. You would also show empathy, right? You would also show assurance. So those are all parts of service quality. Now, this is a famous scale. It's cited thousands of times, okay? And many people use it. So recently I got a paper to review, and the paper was looking at service quality of websites, okay? And they use SurfQual. Does it make sense? But if you think of website as a service,
but services
yeah, I know.
defined as a D, so that's
yeah, so
the
website.
spectrum of how the service is delivered.
Yeah, so on websites, you are providing a service of disseminating information, doing different type of things, like let's say registering for something or paying for something. So website is a service. My question is it right to use SurfQual to assess quality of services on website? Now, maybe no, because it's a little different in context. It's not like traditional services, but the other side can argue it's still a service, so if this scale is for service quality, I can use it, right?
So was this already an extension of the theory and to apply it to that context?
Yes. So I'm going to come to this. Now, before going there, I also have to tell you something. So originally when this theory was proposed, they said that you not only you look at service quality, but you also look at how people are satisfied with the service quality, right? So just imagine this, you all came to this talk with certain expectations, right? Or maybe you never met me before. I think I do not know anybody other than this screen here. So you never met me, but you came here with certain expectations. Because you looked at the topic, maybe somebody said anything, but you had some expectations, right? Whatever it is. Now, once this finishes and you go back, you will have some sort of perceptions because now you have seen me, you have listened to this talk. And what's going to happen is you're going to compare your expectations with your perceptions. If your perceptions are higher than what you expected, you are going to be satisfied. If your perceptions are lower than what you expected, you are not going to be satisfied. Right? This is what it is. So, initially the scale came up with expectations and perceptions, but then people criticize like nobody has time to do all this. Like this questionnaire originally has like 23 questions, but basically it's 46 questions because it's like one time you ask the same questions about how did you feel before coming here, and then you ask them how do you feel now. So I mean nobody has got time to answer things twice. So after criticism, this scale was modified into only perceptions. Like just tell me how do you feel now. You don't need to know what did you expect, right? So this paper that I get for my for reviewing, they use SurfQual with expectations, with perceptions to look at service quality of websites. Okay. Now the first problem here is that the theory is already modified by the original authors, like the authors of the theory. So it's no more valid to do expectation and perception. Why would you do that? So that's one problem here. The other problem is this. So this is a citation of original scale, which was in cited 30,000 times. Just look at these authors, Parashuraman and all this. The same people proposed this scale in 2005, which was eSurfQual, which was about service quality of electronic channels. So the theory is not only modified for expectation and perception, but also for another context, because by 2005 internet was really okay, everybody was using it, so they came up with this. Now the paper that I got uses the traditional SurfQual with expectations and perceptions. So how am I going to accept that paper? that's again, there's a misalignment in the study context and the theory that you're picking up. So the theory should be aligned with the context of the study. Okay? Again, this is just one example. You can really think of your own discipline and see how you can, convert it. Alright, so that's that. And then the third one is sample and conclusion. Now this is important to what you asked me earlier, so I'm going to talk about this. Now I read a lot of papers, especially from young researchers like you. So you finish your PhD, the first thing you're going to do is convert your PhD into thesis or dissertation into a paper and try to publish it, right? You spend how many years in your PhD?
Yeah, 4 years.
4 years. It's a long time, right? And a lot of effort, confusions, readings, headaches, and all that stuff. So what happens is after all this time and doing all these things, people go out very, very enthusiastic. Okay, and they are like, I'm going to change this world. And the last part of your paper has so many things, like my study is doing this. My study is going to do all this stuff. Which is good to say, but really it's not. Okay. It's going to make some impact, but it's not going to really change a lot of stuff, right? So here's what people do. So I look at papers and they're like, I have proven that satisfaction leads to loyalty, and if you're satisfied, you're definitely going to go back to that place again and again. It doesn't work that way. Okay. One day I was traveling. I was going from Orlando to Dubai, and for some reason Emirates was kind enough to convert my ticket from economy to first class, and I flew first class, which was really cool, and I was extremely satisfied. Does it mean I'm going to go and travel in first class every time? No, it doesn't mean that. So it doesn't mean that if you're satisfied, you're going to be loyal all the time. It really doesn't. But I have seen papers which say, I have proven that satisfaction leads to loyalty. Okay. Now, when you look at the sample is like 250 respondents. You look at the population, it's unlimited. Like if I have to do a study on satisfaction with Apple, I don't know how many people use Apple. I did a survey with 200 people, and then I say, I am proving that this is going to happen. It won't. So you have to look at your sample and then make a conclusion. So conclusion should be more in doubt, not really for sure. So you can say, yes, I have proven that in my sample this is happening. It may or may not happen with a larger sample. Okay? Example again. So now in my field, in tourism, many top tier journals are going to test reject the papers if you are collecting one-shot data, which is a longitudinal study, and publishing it. So if like you go to do a survey, 200, 300, even 1,000 people, just one sample, you send it to them, it's going to be test rejected because there's no variation in that study. Okay. This is a screenshot of the web page from one of the top journals, which is Tourism Management. So some of you may know it. So what they say is that either you should collect data on multiple time points, which means that you collect data in January, then you collect data in March, and then you collect data in June, like multiple data sets, and then conduct your analysis and see how it is. Or you can compare it, which you are doing, collect data from UK, collect data from Sudan, collect data from UAE, and then compare and see. So then you provide more insights into it, right? So that's that about your sample.
Sorry to stop you that exam. Shall we take a break for about 10 minutes and we come back? Just for you as well to relax.
Okay.
After this slide?
Okay.
Yeah?
I'm fine. It doesn't matter.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So
let's go for just a 10 minutes break, guys, and we'll come back. I hope you can make it fine.
you can cannot go with one short sample, which means like one data set, right? Now, just remember these things that I'm saying, because in the end, which would be very quick soon, I'm also going to give you some guidelines on how do you deal with these things. So if like, how do you deal with a sample if you have one short data and you don't have resources to collect data again or whatever, so how do you deal with that, okay? Alright, so the second group is measurement, which is again important. If you remember, I said whenever you have a hypothesis, you have variables and you need to know how do you measure these variables, right? That brings more logic to it. So in measurement, we have three types of problems. One is the choice of constructs. Which means when you get into literature, like I give you an example of engagement, right? So if you look at engagement, there's a lot of studies on engagement, right? Many people define it, right, differently. So there are a lot of definitions. So how do you pick up one versus all the others, right? So choice of construct. Then the other one is conceptualization and operationalization. So let's say you pick up one definition. Now how do you measure that? That's also important.
Some question about choice of constructs. So if you take about, for example, engagement, and then let's say there are 10 constructs. And do you really have a choice to pick one, two, or couple, or otherwise, because you rather go and test all of them in order to avoid any critical gap in your literature? Or?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you give me one more minute,
okay.
Probably the next slide I'm going to cover this one with examples, so it would be easier to understand it. Okay. And then the third one is the measurement model test. Like once you picked up your questions and stuff, you have to make sure that those are the right questions, right? So how do you test them? So we are going to talk about something like that. Remove this so that you can.
Yes, sorry, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so a choice of constructs. Now, the problem here is that people pick up constructs, right, with no justification on why you are including those constructs in your model. Okay, I'm going to show you a very normal model in marketing research and how a model looks like. Okay, it looks like this. Oops. Yeah. It pretty much looks like this. Okay, and those of you who do quantitative research, you will see that your model looks like this, where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, or 5 constructs, and they are all, connected to each other. The problem is, many people do not justify why they are including this construct in the model or why they are excluding something. Okay, so if you have, let's say, a model on satisfaction with restaurants, okay, many people would include things like the price that the restaurant charges, the food taste, the decor or the ambience of the restaurant, or the quality of the service that's being provided, or the friendliness of the staff, or stuff like this, right? If you think about how many things can satisfy you or dissatisfy you with a restaurant, there's a lot of them. But every study has a limited scope, right? So you just put a few of them. Why you are choosing these few and not others? That's the main thing where your convincing comes into the picture. And you said there's what's most difficult for you in publication is telling an interesting story. That's part of it. What do you include in that story, right? So going back, that's one thing, and reviewers would ask you questions like this: why do you choose these specific constructs or prefer them over the other available constructs? Okay, that's a very common question people ask. And then why only part of theory is being used in your model versus the other part that's ignored? Okay, so I'm going to give you an example very quick. Now, going back to this again, for most of the studies, again, in marketing or even IAS adoption or whatever, there's something that's common within the discipline. So for example, in marketing, this would be mainly behavioral intentions or loyalty, the final construct, right? That's your end result, right?
Yeah.
Most of it. For information system, most of the time, this one would be adoption or usage of the technology. So what leads to all that, right? For let's say organizational behavior or human resource, it would be mainly turnover intentions or job satisfaction, something like that. most of the times you have one common thing that's your dependent variable, and then you have a lot of other variables that impact on that variable, right? So I'm going to give you an example from marketing. Again, you can think about your own disciplines real quick. Now, behavioral intention, this is the original scale for behavioral intentions or loyalty, okay? That this is really the first one that was developed. So if you look, it shows 5 different things. Now, how many of you are in marketing here or have read marketing papers? You guys and you. So if you look at these questions, a very quick glimpse, which questions do you see a lot in your in the research papers for market for loyalty when they ask them?
Right.
Do you see a lot of this in research compared to others?
This is not my area, but in most of the papers which I read in the area of marketing, I see that loyalty.
You see them, right?
Yes, I see loyalty a lot.
I mean, my career, I have hardly seen all the others, really. Most of the times, it's this, okay? And even in this, it's the first 3 that we see a lot. These 2 sometimes, but most of the time, it's just the first 3, okay? Now, what's the problem here? The problem here is, you take one variable called behavioral intentions. That's your final variable. This is the original scale. These are all behavioral intentions, but you choose to pick up only loyalty, even though the name in your model is behavioral intentions. How does this match? Like, you say that these 3 are showing behavioral intentions. The original scale says that all of those are behavioral intentions. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, let's say I give the researcher benefit of the doubt, and I say, okay, fine, just pick up loyalty and use it as behavioral intention. Even then, why are you removing these 2 items and taking those 3? Like, why you are picking and choosing, right? Now, the problem is, if you do that, you have to justify. If you don't justify, you cannot just pick up some stuff and throw the others. That's the big issue right now. So this is another mistake where people pick up some of the stuff and decide to leave the others, or they pick up part of something and leave the other one out. And now this one, I picked up from a published paper. I've removed those so that it's not identifiable. But if you see, this is again, it's a published paper, and those 3 questions that I was talking about, you see them all over the place, which is difficult to understand, but that's how it is.
See, in information systems, the 3rd item will be sort of subjective norms or social influence. It wouldn't be part of behavioral intention.
Yeah, so again, it's specific to disciplines, right? But most of the times you would see that it's like cherry picking, you know, you pick something, you remove the other ones without any reason.
Just to clarify, because when I was writing my PhD proposal and on the topic, I was conducting a review, and then in the review, my initial search of review, a shortlist, I wouldn't say a shortlist, I got up to, for employee empowerment, I got up to 5 constructs of employee empowerment. But then I carried out more review, then I discovered there are other scholars who have given additional dimensions, which is also part of the employee empowerment. So I added that. Further, I carried out more review in 2018, and I come across various other papers, published in good journals, given another construct. So my question is that at what point in a PhD, for example, research, where you have to stop, where you can see that, oh, this is, for example, I have 5 + 2 7, and then for further literature which has been current research, they bring in more dimensions, which is also relevant, because my aim is to observe or to evaluate the overall predictive power between employee empowerment and performance appraisal. So I'm not covering the part of empowerment, I'm covering the overall empowerment. In order to cover the overall empowerment, the more dimensions I have, the better, so I can cover or close the theoretical gap in my literature review section.
Right.
So at what point do you suggest at a PhD where you can say
Okay.
that's it?
So again, it's a very good question. The thing is, a lot of people are going to tell you that you have to look at saturation. So every time you get a saturation, you stop there where things start getting repeated, which is okay. But the problem is, how do you define saturation, or when do you know the saturation is there, right? Now, to your question, it's your personal choice. If you have 20 different conceptualizations of something, or if you have 20 different ways of measuring one variable, it's really your call which one you want to pick up. But whichever you pick up, you have to justify on why you think you're paying. Like when you pick up something, you must have some sort of a reasoning behind it, right? I mean, you can't say that I closed my eye and I just evolved whatever and picked up one. You have to have some sort of reasoning, right? And you have to provide that reasoning. Now, another thing here is you said that normally when I look at empowerment, I'm looking at the overall empowerment. So the more the dimensions or constructs, the more holistic it is, right? It's not true. And it's not, you know, I mean, you cannot really generalize that if there are a lot of constructs, it's covering a lot of things. Which again I'll talk about.
So there will not be any criticism in future to say, for example, autonomy, self-efficacy, decision-making, risk-taking. If I miss any of those, which is a part of the key dimension of empowerment, so there won't be any question of me on my side say you're
okay.
lack currency or something.
Right. So let's say when you get into the literature, you see that there's one scholar that presented one conceptualization of empowerment that has, let's say, 4 constructs or dimensions, and then there's another scholar with 6 constructs and dimensions, then there's another one with 5. Which of these you pick up? So let's say you pick up the first one with 4 dimensions. Now here it's important you put all those 4. You can't really do here, you pick up this one and then you take only 3 out of 4. Then you are in trouble. If you pick up that overall,
so you rely on 4.
Yeah. Now, sometimes what happens is that there's so much confusion where you have one scale that is, people have used it, but also others have criticized it, and all the scales are like that, and you think that, oh my God, what's going to happen? In that case, it's a good idea to come up with your own scale, and that's merge everything together and then go through a whole procedure on, you know, shortlisting things and coming up with something that's really to your context, like tailored to your context. So that's another way, but obviously it's much more work.
Yeah, because one way, because when you're assessing one particular agile practice, which is employee empowerment, you don't want to lose out any of the key elements of employee empowerment, which could create future problems in the future, to say there's a gap in my own literature.
Right.
So, okay, so you suggest that it doesn't have to be holistic, it could be...
As far as you can justify it, right?
Yes, my question is related to that, because if you will add more and more independent variables, then when you test it through SPSS and Remedies software, you will find a higher level of multicollinearity. So because of that higher multicollinearity, now you have to drop something from the model. And if you drop something from the model, according to your perception, that variable is the most important, and you don't want to drop that variable, but you can't run the regression because they said that you have to exclude that.
Okay.
So
No, we talk about 2 different things here. Not the variables.
I was gonna say.
The discussion on the construct.
Even if you pick up the variables,
my variables are limited to 2. Right? Independent variables. But within that, there are several constructs. Is that?
So even you pick up variables. Let's say if your topic is, let's look at antecedents of job satisfaction. Like what are the factors that lead to job satisfaction? Now, because your topic is so open that you can pick up as many variables as you want, so you go to literature, you see what are the antecedents of job satisfaction, right? So you might end up with 20. Yes, you may run into multicollinearity if one study says salary is an antecedent to your job performance or satisfaction, another study says wage. Now, if you pick up salary and wage together, obviously there is a multicollinearity. So here's where you have to use your own logic, right? Mix them together, see which ones make more sense. Again, theoretical support is important, so you can't just like, you know, put everything together to make a...
Can I just add, your point is valid there, and I've been in that situation sometimes, and I think it becomes more of a problem when you have a theory that is rich with a very high number of factors, like the U-Thought 2, which is very well known in our area, and I think it's being used as well a lot in tourism. There are so many factors in this theory, and then when you want to extend it further and add factors or variables, it becomes even more complicated with the collinearity issue. But even with that, it's always advisable to add all the factors and see which one of them works. And in fact, in most of our papers, we add more factors and we see which one of them works, especially that if you look into a complex phenomenon. So it's better to have this factor in and see how it goes in the analysis. In terms of, sorry, just to, because you come from that background as always on PLS, I think PLS deals well as well with collinearity and even multi-collinearity, and unfortunately we didn't have time for this, otherwise Faizan is an expert in that area. He would have helped a lot in terms of how to treat and deal with issues of collinearity.
Only just one thing to say about where I have, after that I have some recent studies as well, and what the researchers did, they have make you can say they combined all the independent variables together, and then they done a regression. There was only one dependent and one independent variables, because all the independent variables were added into another, and that is how they tested it. So do you think it is a
I don't think so, because because again, look, especially some contexts are very complicated. Like if you look at employee behavior, right? It's a complicated phenomena. Like we all work in places, right? And there are a lot of things that impact your satisfaction, but they are not all equally. If you look at them relatively, they do not have equal impact, right? So I may not really be happy with the color of the walls in my office, but it's not going to impact my job turnover intentions as much as my respect or self-respect would impact it, right? So putting everything together is sort of like counting everything.
Because the paper which I read, it was published in postulate.
It doesn't matter, because sometimes I see papers published in really good journals, and I really do not understand how these papers are published. Oh, wait a minute, so he had a question, let me take that one.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good question, and my experience with my PhD was around factors that influence ICT adoption in this sector. So, you know, choosing what constructs to include or what to add, it departs from, you know, what is the issue, what is your hypothesis, what is exactly that you want to address. Because it's the theoretical basis you are perhaps departing from. So from your theories, you have reviewed them. What are the strengths there? What are the weaknesses? What is it that you want to do from there? So that's where you can actually say now with my constructs, because you can't take all the constructs and try, it depends. If your hypothesis about testing all those, yes, as you were saying, you could. So there must be justification why you choose to have more, or why should you decide to drop some of the constructs?
Exactly.
It depends on the question. What is the hypothesis?
Here's one other thing here which is very important is the context of your study. So sometimes, let's say if you're looking at the drivers of satisfaction, again going back to the restaurants, let's say satisfaction with restaurants, or maybe you want to look at the reasons for road accidents in a country, right? Theory is important. Let's say if you have a theory that talks about stimuli, like earlier I said, so road accidents, there can be a lot of stimuli, right? It can be the road condition, it can be the traffic, it can be how many advertisements you are on the side, people's attention get that. It can be alcohol consumption. I mean, it can be a lot of stimuli, right? So the theory is there. Theory is generic. You can pick up a lot of variables that fit into the theory. Now, let's say if you are conducting this study in US, yes, you can pick up, let's say, alcohol consumption as a reason for road accident, right? But if you conduct the same study, let's say in Saudi Arabia, maybe it's not a very common thing because people do not drink alcohol there. At least this is what I think. In that type of scenario, you may want to drop those variables that do not make sense to the context of the studies. You don't have to include them in there, right? So, but again, you had something else?
No, because we're talking about the four-star journals where the scholars, multiple scholars agree that agile practices have impact on building the entrepreneurial capability of a particular sector or your organization. So when it comes to analyze those factors, HR practices, so for example, recruitment, selection, training, reward, industry relations, they all have impact on the development of entrepreneurial capability of an organization. But this is what my proposals I started thinking about, and I said, how is it possible that recruitment has the same power of building employee entrepreneurial capability as compared to the reward? Reward may have a different influence over the recruitment program or selection program. So that was published in 4, and a lot of scholars agree, but I haven't seen no criticism on this paper, and it got published. You know what I mean? Because it's very open to say all practices have power.
Yeah.
So something we need to investigate, which one have more power than other.
Exactly. So yeah, again, to summarize, you cannot put everything together unless you have a very strong reason to, you know. So like for instance, if you, again, I just thought of it. So if let's say you are doing a study on looking at how intrinsic and extrinsic factors impact on your job satisfaction. In that scenario, yes, you can put all the intrinsic things one and all the extrinsic things, and then you have a justification that you are looking at importance of intrinsic versus extrinsic. But if you don't have a justification, you put everything together, doesn't make any sense.
And one more question, which is also related with the measurement. I've seen different studies where the researchers have measured the dependent variable with 2 or more than 2 different, you can say, accounting ratios. But can I measure an independent variable with more than 1 accounting ratio and then can test it against the dependent variable? So dependent variable to see that which variable has more effect on the dependent variable, and then after that I can use that in my model.
Yeah, so 2 different things, okay? I'm going to use this one to explain this real quick. Alright, before that I have a question to ask, okay? Let's say if you are standing with your wife and I ask you, what's the relation between you two? Your answer would be, we are partners, right? Something like that. Or if you're standing with your sister or brother and I ask you, what's the relation between you two? You'll say, we are siblings, right? But in the same case, if I ask you, what's your relation with him? You may say, I'm his brother, or I'm her brother, or you would say, she is my sister, or something like that. There's a difference between these 2 things. One is where you are telling me the mutual relation between 2 bodies, right? And the other one, you are telling a directional relation from one to other, right? Here, the first one would be more like correlation. We are looking at your impact on that one and that one's impact on you, right? So it's like 2-way. The second question is we are only looking at your impact on the other person, right? So it's like 1 way. Now in this case, you ask me if you can do something like, if your model looks like this, this is your independent variable 1, this is your independent variable 2, and this is your dependent variable. So some people look at how much is this one impacting this and how much is this one impacting this. You can look at relative importance, right? Your question was, can I have dependent variable 2 to look at how this one is impacting them? This was your question. You cannot, because you are looking at 1-way directions. So you're looking at this one's impact here, this one's here. So you can look at relative, but
the dependent variables are same, but only the measurement bases are different.
For the dependent variable?
For the dependent variable.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so in that case, yes, you can definitely do that. In fact, one of my very good friends, he just finished his PhD very recently, and his PhD is about education in hospitality and tourism. So he was looking at how self-directed learning, where some people are self-directed learners, impacts your online learning readiness. So if you are self-directed learners, do you prefer to learn online by yourself, right? So something like that, where there are 2 scales for self-directed learning. So he used it with one scale first and look at what the model fit is and what the statistics are, and then he used another scale to do it. Whichever had better statistics, then he said this scale is better compared to the other one. So you can definitely do that, only if that's your research objective. Like if your objective is not to pick up the best scale, why would you change scales in the middle and see like which one is good?
The reason, especially in accounting, the reason is that when we talk about the organizations, then we can calculate their value based on the book values, which are given in the financial statement, and we can calculate their values based on the market value. So both of them are relevant, and that is why, and my dependent variable is firm performance. So I want to see the impact of corporate governance mechanism on the firm performance. So I read few papers where the researcher has adopted that approach, that they have measured that dependent variable with the help of a book value measure and with the market value measure, and then they find the relationship that
Yes. So yes, again, here your objective is really to see which one predicts performance better, right? So you can obviously change and see which one, that's your objective. But if let's say I'm looking at satisfaction and loyalty and there are multiple skills and that's not my objective, why would I do that, you know? Because in that case, you have to collect data multiple times using multiple skills, right? And you don't want to do that if that's not our objective. So, all right, let's go ahead. So the problems with conceptual and operationalization of constructs. Conceptualization is how you define things, like what's the concept of that thing. Operationalization is how do you measure them, okay? Now most of you are using smartphones, right? One thing with the smartphone is how, what's the speed of the phone, right? Then people decide whether they should buy it based on the speed of the phone. So the first thing would be, how do you define speed? What is speed, right? So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, how would you measure that speed? So for everybody, that definition is different. So like if I use a lot of social media and stuff, if my phone gets hung during posting things, this and that, I would think the speed is not good, right? And let's say Nisreen uses it a lot for emailing and this and that, and if her phone, right, if that gets hung for emails and stuff, she will think the speed is not good. It's like completely different thing. We have to conceptualize it based on what we want to do, and then we operationalize it, like how do we measure that, right? So that's how it works. Now here, the first mistake is when you are doing your literature review, failing to provide a detailed and clear definition of constructs. And what happens with most of the people is, obviously in literature review, you provide all these different definitions about something, right? So let's say if my study is about empowerment, so I go to the literature, there are 20 definitions and I put most of them in my literature, like ABC define empowerment like this, however XYZ define it like blah blah blah, right, all that. And then we leave it there. That's a mistake, because what happens is reviewers or readers do not know what's your stance on it. So you have all these definitions, but you should end it up with what you think is the best definition. Yes, your definition. So every time whenever you are defining constructs, you should end up that paragraph with this study would pick up the definition, blah blah blah. So everybody knows that, okay, this is your stance on that construct, right? And I'll tell you why is it important to do this. I'm going to show you some examples, okay? Obviously, it's important if the construct is your focal construct. Like if in your case, employee empowerment was really the focal construct.
I've not done number of paper review. Couldn't find one paper which has an operationalized definition of empowerment.
It's very common.
And they all publish in Emerald, big journals. So where they're at.
So that's exactly what I'm telling you. Not many people do it, and that's a big mistake. Very soon I'm going to show you examples, and you will see why is it important.
In this particular problem, and I don't know the details of the research, but if it is a lack of evidence or material from research, then we should be looking for the space policy, outputs, etc. You may have that. So maybe that's the solution.
Right.
No, it's a case of most of the papers, because initially when I did the formative assessment research, there was a lot of gap in the literature, and was not being, nobody criticized, nobody picked up. Then I started doing it with the performance appraisal and employee empowerment. Yeah, there is no, I couldn't find any which has an operationalized. Yeah, it's a very descriptive. People have criticized the others, but when it comes to formulate your own understanding, demonstrate your own understanding about overall how you define operationalized definition of empowerment.
See, I'm going to give you an example from law, okay, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think we never talked about law at all. Just imagine this, there's a hearing in a court, and in America we have the jury system, right? So there's a jury sitting, and there are people from the society, they listen to all what's happening, and then everybody comes up with their own verdict, and they say, this is what I think, this is what I think, blah, blah, blah. Just imagine you are in a court and there's something happening, and then everybody gives their verdict, but the judge gets up without any final verdict. Nobody knows what's going to happen next, right? So this problem is pretty much like that, where you say like, okay, this person defines, blah, 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 but then you leave it open, like, okay, now what do you think about it? Like, you know, so that's pretty much like that. So very important to end up your literature with what's your stance on that variable or construct, okay? I'm going to show you why is it important. Most of the studies are very focused on one variable. It's important for that particular variable to definitely say where do you stand with it. Like this is a picture which just shows like customer engagement in online brand communities. It's right in the middle, it has a few antecedents, it has some consequences. Imagine we do not know how authors define this variable. It puts everything in doubt because you don't know how they feel. So, going ahead, I'm going to show you something real quick. So you don't have to read all of it, okay? But before this, I mean, if I put it there, I know you're going to read it, so I'm just going to remove it, okay? So, satisfaction. Now we all listen to this word so much, right? Satisfaction, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, this, that, blah, blah, blah. So you go to some place to eat, okay? And ask you, did it make you satisfied? And you say yes. Your satisfaction is based on some stuff, right? There are two concepts there. Either you use your brain to make logical decisions and say, okay, I went there, the waiting time was short, the food was good, blah, blah. You should think about it, perceptions, and then you conclude by saying, I was satisfied or I was not satisfied. It's perception based, right? But some people are more emotional, so they are satisfied with something if they felt happy there. So, you know, recently I went to a coffee shop with a friend, and the friend recommended to go there, and it was not really good. So I asked my friend, what makes you happy? Like, why you come here? It's not good. So I just feel happy here. So I'm satisfied with it. So some people are more emotional when it comes to satisfaction, right? So there are two schools of thought. Some people think satisfaction is perceptions. Some people think satisfaction is emotional, right? So it's two ways. Now this is a paper where it explains, so this is what they explain. The first yellow line, it says like satisfaction is more like cognition, and the second one is saying it's more like emotional construct, right? So it's more emotional. So it's good to have this definition. Now imagine these are two different conceptualizations. Now you explain all this, but you didn't mention what do you think, or at least what does satisfaction mean for your study? Is it emotions or is it satisfaction? Why is it important? I'm going to show you now, okay? Because if you don't do that, you can run into misalignment between two variables, okay? Look at this, okay? I'm going to come back to this one. This is a study that I did. This is my study, okay, in theme park. So I look at all these variables, like the physical environment of the theme park, how employees interact with you, and how other customers interact with you, because it's important, right? Imagine you are sitting in one of those roller coasters and somebody is punching you from the back, right? So other customers are important as well. I'm looking at its impact on delight and satisfaction, and then ultimately loyalty. Now delight is a what? It's an emotion, right? Delighted, it's an emotion. Imagine I didn't explain what is satisfaction in my study. Right? Does it mean emotion impacts emotion? But does it make sense? Doesn't. So it's important to say whether satisfaction is emotion or perception to make it much clearer. Okay, going back. So this is again, I've taken like questions where people, how do people measure satisfaction? So in this study, these are the two questions used. One is saying, I'm satisfied with the restaurant staff. I'm satisfied with the restaurant service quality. And this is another study where it says that I was pleased to dine in at the restaurant. The overall feeling I got was satisfied. The overall feeling I got from the restaurant put me in a good mood. I really enjoyed myself. So if you look at both these questionnaires, this one is showing what? More like emotions. This one is showing more like perceptions. Now, this is again another important thing. So, most of the times what happens is like, how do you come up with your question? Like when you are forming your questionnaire, right? You've done all your literature review, everything is done, you have to collect data. What do people do? Okay, now it's time for creating a questionnaire. The best thing to do for a lot of people is go to Google Scholar. It's not I'm not saying this is the best thing to do. For a lot of people, what's the best thing is, go to Google Scholar, put customer satisfaction in there, pick up the first paper in the search, go to the questionnaire, pick up the questions for the satisfaction, put it in your questionnaire. This is what a lot of people do, right? Now imagine you didn't conceptualize it that way. Just imagine for one moment that you conceptualize your satisfaction as an emotional construct in your literature review, and then you pick up these two questions to measure it.
We are not going to do that.
It's really not aligned with what you are saying in your literature review.
Academic integrity.
Right? So it's important, very important to make sure that whatever you're conceptualizing, your operationalization should be aligned with it. It's really important there, okay? So that's that with conceptualization and operationalization. The third one is test of measurement model. Now imagine you picked up these questions to measure certain things. How do you test them? Okay? So many people, okay, now here we have a lot of technical stuff about quantitative research. Just a show of hand, how many of you are qualitative researchers? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, a lot, okay. A lot, okay. I'm going to make it less complicated and not a lot of jargon from quantitative research, but still it's what it is. I can't change it a lot. Okay, so the first thing what people do is they do not conduct factor analysis. Now, maybe you have heard of factor analysis, even if you're a qualitative researcher. What factor analysis simply does is it shows you which question in your questionnaire belongs to which variable in your model. Okay, so going back here, so I have what 6 variables here, and obviously I have a lot of questions to measure these variables. So just imagine I have like 3 items for each construct, right, which would put me 18 questions. What factor analysis does is it just makes sure that whatever questions you are using to measure the variables are really measuring those variables, okay? So that's one way of really looking at, did you measure what you were supposed to measure, okay? So if you are not conducting factor analysis, it means you are not really telling me whether your questionnaire really measured what you wanted to measure, right? So that's one big problem. People should not do that. Another problem is there are 2 types of factor analysis. One is exploratory, one is confirmatory. And I'm going to give you an easy example to understand this. Some people conduct EFA, which is exploratory, instead of confirmatory, okay? And the example I'm going to give you is nothing to do with statistics, okay? So imagine that I came here to this area for the first time, okay? And I go out to eat something, I have no clue about anything, so I'm going to explore, right? I'm going to go to one street to another street and see what food options are available. I probably talk to people and see what it is. I'm going to pick up one restaurant and I really like that food, so that was exploration. Now I come back again here tomorrow for a workshop. We only have 15-20 minutes to, go for a break and eat. Am I going to explore again, or am I going to go to the same place and just pick up the food and eat it? That's more confirmation, where I already know that place, so I just go and confirm and eat it, right? How do we use it in research? So whenever you have, like earlier you were asking a question, let's say if I want to measure satisfaction, I go to my literature, I see that somebody already used these 4 questions to measure satisfaction in restaurant. Oops. Yeah, so I see that somebody used these 4 questions to measure satisfaction. So I just confirm them again in my context, because I might be conducting a study with restaurants in the US, or maybe with Mexican restaurants in the US or something, whatever. But I'm going to confirm whether these 4 questions really measure satisfaction in my context. This is more confirmation, right? In some cases, you have so many questions available from the same variable that it's difficult to pick up one scale, right? Like earlier what you were saying about empowerment. In that case, you pick up a lot of them and then you explore them, exploratory factor analysis. You see whether these questions are really measuring it or not. So if they are not, then you delete one by one until it becomes really specific to your study. So you use them, and in the future, let's say if I am conducting a study on empowerment, I may pick up your scale and confirm it in another context. So it becomes more valid and reliable. That's how it works. So many people, what they do is they pick up scales from established scales, and then they conduct EFA on it, or exploratory, which is a mistake. You shouldn't be doing it. Or some people mix up a lot of things and then do confirmatory factor analysis, which again is wrong. You should be doing exploratory and then confirmatory. Now here, one very important thing to talk about is, let's say you pick up scales from a lot of different places, and now you pick up one scale, you go for confirmatory factor analysis, you start deleting because it's not really fixing your context, right? You start deleting one by one, and let's say you had 10 questions, you start deleting, you delete one, it's still not fitting, you delete another one, it's still not fitting, you delete another one, you keep going. What's happening is you're actually losing a lot of very valuable data, because every time you are deleting one question, imagine you collected data from 500 people. You delete one question, it means you are deleting 500 perceptions, right? Which is really not good. So you cannot delete, just keep deleting. The magic number here is 20%. Whenever you are doing confirmatory factor analysis, and if you have to delete more than 20%, it really means that you had miscalculated your context with that scale. You have to do exploratory factor analysis instead of confirmatory, which means the scale really is not to confirm in your context. Now again, imagine you pick up a scale developed in America, and then you go to use that scale in Sudan, okay? And the scale was about technology readiness. It's not going to work, because people in the US are really ready for technology. They are born in technology versus a very less developed country, right? So it's not going to work. So you cannot confirm scales from one context into another context if they are drastically different contexts. Okay, you have a question?
Yes, I have one. Because you talk, I just want to know at what stage when you conduct your research and then you already define whether it's exploratory, explanatory, confirmative, you already designed that. Because when you go into, you know what your research aim is about. When you conduct your, when you design the questionnaire covering all the dimensions of your independent variable, then at what stage, because if you have to delete or add a question, you do before you actually or collect the data. Because once you collect the data, I don't understand, when after collecting the data, you are deleting the question, and deleting one question means 500 responses. This is something that you've got to check the suitability measurement before you run a survey or collect the data.
Okay. Again, a good question. So there's a difference here. One is the type of research that you are doing. So your research can be exploratory, where there's less known and you are exploring the research area and stuff. That's a different thing. This one is more about measurement. So this exploratory has nothing to do with exploratory research. This confirmation has nothing to do with explanatory research, right?
So for measurement, would you not want to run a pilot test for the questionnaire to see whether there are a number of questions?
Yes. So important. Pilot study, pre-testing, and all that stuff is very important. Okay. This one goes before that. Okay, and I'm going to show you how it works. Okay, let's go back here. Yeah, this is better. So if you look here, you are looking at the impact of independent variable on dependent variable, right? This is what you want to do, and most of the time our research aim is to test this hypothesis. That this is what we want to do. And this variable is made of these two questions, and this variable is made of these two questions, right? Just for one moment, imagine that this is your home and this is your office. You want to go from your home to your office, right? Do you go to your office on a public holiday? Why?
Because you're not
You're not supposed to, right? You're not supposed to. You remember the pictures I showed you in the start? PhDs are a different breed.
Yeah, that's different.
So, just imagine that if you want to go from your home to your office, first of all, you need to make sure that everything with your home is okay. Like, I haven't seen a person whose home is on fire and the person is going to office. But you need to make sure your home is all good. And then you need to make sure your office is all good, and then you go from your home to your office, right? So before testing the hypothesis, you need to make sure that your variables are valid and reliable, right? How do you know your variables are valid and reliable? If you can really measure what you are supposed to measure, right? So every time you are going to test hypothesis, you are going to make sure that before the relation, your variable is good, right? Pilot test, everything is good. Pilot test you are doing to make sure that your questionnaire is understandable to the respondents, right? Now you are going to collect data from your sample. Now what you are checking is my sample good enough? Like, are they agreeing to what I'm asking them? So, just imagine like this. Do you know a lot? Recently, there was an advertisement from Dolce and Gabbana. And they were showing Chinese people doing some stuff with chopsticks, right? You may have seen that one. Yeah, and they're almost out of business because they made a huge blunder. Chinese people have a lot of buying power and they were making fun of their cultural stuff of eating chopsticks, right? Do you think they might have done a lot of market research before really launching that advertisement? This is what we think, right?
Yes,
but they must have done something. It's a huge company. Okay, now let me give you another example. Burger King did the same thing 2 days back. They come up with an advertisement where they are showing an Asian version of a burger or something, and I don't know, somehow they had an idea of showing how people cannot eat burger with chopstick. Chinese people making fun of chopsticks. Again, the same mistake, which another company did a few months back, and they're almost out of business. Now these are huge corporations. They do market testing, but they still do these blunders, right? So sometimes it's possible that you're doing a pilot test, everything looks good, but your real sample doesn't agree to what you're asking them. So that's why it's important to do these things even after pilot test and pre-test. Okay?
And not only for that, when you're using the questionnaire to collect the data, then I think you're doing these structural analysis and these type of things before finalizing your questionnaire to see the reliability of the data.
So yes, there's another test which is normally called Cronbach alpha. Yeah, just to give you an idea, Cronbach alpha, many people are criticizing now. There was a very interesting paper that I read and I loved the title of it, and that was, "Thank you, Cronbach alpha, it's time to move on."
Yes.
So many people criticize it, but still a lot of people are using it. It's just one way to show whether your items belong to the variable where they are supposed to be, right? This is what it means. Now here is...
Sorry, Faisal, just to comment on this. Would you say that the composite reliability test is more relevant now?
Yes, and the reason for that is...
As an alternative?
I mean, there are still people who are criticizing composite reliability.
Yeah.
So, okay, so again, I'm trying to make it really simple so that everybody can understand. For Cronbach alpha, many people think it underestimates the values, which is, so it goes really below over. For composite reliability, which is another measure of looking at reliability, people think it overestimates the values. So recently there's another one which is called Rho A. You may have seen it. Which people think it really gives you the real value. So, again, in my opinion, academics are one of the most difficult people to talk with. They have nothing.
Got that, right?
They have really got nothing to do but argue. So there's a lot of arguments. And,
Specific.
well,
We have different politicians.
And you know, we have got countries where they have put academics as politicians. Anyway, it's another debate, but I think that there's a lot of argument about every single thing, and that's why for some values you would see that some people say if your value is 0.7, it's good. Some people say 0.6, 0.5, I don't know, whatever, right? Because of argument. So I would still say even you use Cronbach alpha, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's still
usually what I do is include all three of them.
I also do.
Just to make
Include
sure
all
that
three of them.
any reviewer that might come up with something, you
Yeah.
can still find what he's looking for.
I do the same. So, but again, that's how it is. You know, you have all types of references for everything. So, you know. Okay, so yeah, I think we can move beyond this. Manager. Okay, this is again another very, very important thing. Has anybody heard of this common method variance? Okay, you did. Anybody else? A little bit. Okay, so here's what it is. Okay, I always give this example, and it's funny. My students, every time they get a low grade, they think there's something wrong with me. Which is interesting, because if a student is getting low grade, how is it something wrong with me? But they just blame me for it.
And one more thing, we just want to add. When the students get A grade, A plus, they said that we get exactly. And when they fail, they said that lecturer has given us this grade.
Yeah, and even putting it together, when I might ask my student, okay, you think there's something wrong with me because you got a B, what do you deserve? And they say A plus. So, this is how it is. Now, imagine this, that one of my students go to my dean and say, like, there's something wrong with Dr. Ali, he gave me a B plus, and my dean says, okay, I trust you, and I fire Dr. Ali without asking me. It would be terrible, right? So you are looking at what happened, you are looking at the cause, you are looking at the result, and you're looking at it from one source without looking at the other source, and you're making a conclusion. That's exactly what we do in our research. So your research is on employee empowerment, right? Employee empowerment is a mix of individual versus and organizational factors, right? There are a lot of organizational factors that lead to employee empowerment. There's a lot of individual factors leading to employee empowerment, and employee empowerment is basically an individual thing, right? About the person. And you are collecting all this data from the employee. Yes. So employee is going to always not underestimate, but underpresent the organizational factors where, like, my salary is not good, there's no promotion, the work environment is not good. They're always going to overstate their own performance. I perform well, I do good, my job is good, and then you ask them, like, okay, are you satisfied? And the satisfaction is always going to be low. You know, so it creates a problem, because you are using the same source for independent variables, for the dependent variables, and then you make conclusions. That's what's common method variance is, where you use the common method for both independent and dependent variables. And logically, you should ask employees about organizational factors, and then you should ask the employer about the performance of the employee, not the employee, right? That will give you a balanced picture of what's happening. But we cannot do that, it's difficult to do it that way, right? So now, every time we have research, let's say like this, we look at construct A, construct B, we look at the impact of A on B. So imagine if I have to do a survey and I have questions about construct A and construct B, and I give you a questionnaire to fill, right? So whatever you fill on that questionnaire would be the observed score, right? It would be what I'm observing. Now, it may not be the true score. It may not be exactly how you feel, because it depends on the time of the day, your mood, how lengthy is the questionnaire, did you really understand what I was asking, or maybe your perception of the question versus my reality of the question is very different, right? So there can be a lot of factors. So it's hardly where your observed score is equal to the true score of the variable. It's really impossible because people are so different, especially in social sciences. So we always say that observed score is equal to the true score plus the error, which can come from a lot of different reasons, right? So it means that whenever we are asking others to tell us what we want to know, that one has some sort of a problem. Same with the dependent variable, and then the relation between them will also have some sort of a problem, right? So that's why common method variance is very important to look for, whether your model had a problem with common method or not. It's highly possible that there's no problem with common method, like everything is pretty okay. Okay? So it's good to test them. So there are a lot of different tests to put in place in order to test for common method variance.
Yes, most 3-star, 4-star journals would ask for the common method variance, but I think the issue there is which test do we use? There's the Harman test, which is an SK test, but again, it's highly criticized. There is the common method factor, I think, I remember, and that's a bit better, but when you have many factors in the model, I think it doesn't work well.
Right.
So which test do you recommend?
Yeah, I'm going to come to it.
Oh,
Very
sorry.
quick.
Okay.
So here, because I talked about the data and everything, so it means that common method can be tested with the data, obviously the data that you collected, because we're talking about it. It can also be tested before you collect data, because it has to do with how you design your questionnaire and all that stuff, to make sure that people are understanding that, you know, how they should answer or stuff like this. So there are methods that are grouped into two. So one is called procedural remedies, which is more about before data collection, you know, and the other one is statistical control, which is more about after data collection. Sometimes you may not know it, like for instance, if you already collected your data and now you know that it's an important thing, so you cannot go pre-data collection, then you have to deal with it post-data collection. Normally you should try to do it pre-data collection, okay? So one of the things is you obviously collect data for IV and DV from different sources. It's difficult sometimes, you know, you cannot do that. Then you do temporal separation, which means you collect data for IVs in one time and then for DV in another time. So like if you are conducting a study on information system adoption, you collect data for your IVs today and then collect for DV after a week or after a month or something, right? So there's a difference. But again, it's impossible because how do you track people? And even if you pick up people who are willing, it's difficult. You cannot take a lot of people like that, right? Then there's psychological separation, which means you put a heading for each variable, which a lot of us do in questionnaires. You put a heading, you put the questions, or you put a little bit explanation of what you really want them to answer. You put every variable on a separate page. It can be a lot of things. We are psychologically separating the questions, the variables from each other. Another one is methodological separation, where you can use different type of scales. Let's say if you are using 5-point scale for IVs, you can use a 9-point scale for DV or a 7-point scale for DV, right? So that can also be, but you shouldn't be doing like using a 5-point for one question and then 7, then 9, then 6, then 2, then 4. You don't do that. I mean, that's not going to give you anything. And then statistical control is a lot. Like you said, there's one which is Herman single factor test. In a summary, what it means is, if in your study there are 6 variables, right? You put all of those questions into one, like together, and see how much of a bit, again it's more quantitative, but it's more like exploratory factor analysis. You put all of them into the exploratory factor analysis. Logically it should give you 6 variables, because you pick them up from 6, right? But if let's say it gives you 2 variables, that means that many people thought about questions in terms of 2 variables. Does this make sense? So,
in more than 2.
Yeah. Okay, let me give you an idea, okay? Here is what it means. Let's say you are all from different disciplines, okay? You come here, and I'm trying to bring more and more examples from different disciplines to explain stuff to you, right? We take a break, we come back. So initially, let's say there were people from 6 disciplines, right? When we come back, I ask you, okay, based on your perception of this talk, get into groups where you think that examples were same for you, right? So let's say there's one group for marketing, one for organizational commitment or whatever we talked about, HR and stuff, and then there's one person from law who left, who thought it's not good. So now what happened is, I tried a lot, but you know. So now what happened is, logically I should have 6 groups, even after all this, right? Because there were people from 6 disciplines. But now I have 3 groups, which means that 3 other groups, people in those groups thought that I'm actually talking to, you know, this group. So now I have 3. It's still okay, because I still have 3 groups. It shouldn't be one group. If all of you come into one group and you think that I was just talking about marketing only, then it's a problem. Because everybody thought of it not the way they were supposed to think of it, right? Now, let's say if you have 3 groups and there are 20 people, one group has 18 people, second group has 1 person, third group has 1 person, it's still a problem because majority of the people are in one group. So what happens is if you are doing, when you do this Harman one-factor test, you do EFA and see how many variables you get. The first condition is you should get more than 2 variables. Okay? You should get more than 2 variables, which means that people still have variation in the items. The second condition is that your first variable should be less than 50%. So it should be less than 50% of overall. Right? I know it's a bit tough, but I'm trying to, we have the lawyer back.
Sorry, I just went outside. I was going to hang myself, but I decided, no, I'll come back. I can do this, I can do this.
I was listening. Okay, so that's what Harman one-factor test is. Now, as Nisreen said, it's heavily criticized. I'm going to show you how it is, okay? And then there are other things which obviously, one of them is the correlation procedures. You also have to look at the correlation, and your correlations for all the variables shouldn't be higher than 0.8 or something. Because if they are higher, it means people are thinking similarly about the variable. Correlation is higher, right? Stuff like this.
So if it is below 0.8, then it's fine.
It's okay, yeah. Okay. So all those type of things, and then control. But again, I don't want to go because those are all statistical, and you know everybody does statistics. So it's. So
it's a very well person. So for them, this is like Chinese. So yes, for me, it's a pleasure. But yes, please tell me.
How this partial correlation is different from Pearson?
just different algorithms. There's different formula for calculating it, but it's pretty much the same. Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead. This is one paper that was done in hospitality, and this paper actually looked at all these published papers in top-tier hospitality journals and looked at the common method variance in these papers, right? But it's very interesting. So they looked at 2,204 papers, 2,204, where 695 papers had a potential problem of common method variance, which means that they used a survey, similar survey for independent, dependent, and blah, blah, blah. But out of these, only 137 papers employed some sort of test for common method variance, which means not many people are doing it, which is not good. Now, how many of them used it? So if you look at out of those 137, 84 people used statistical test, and out of these 84, 70 of them used Harman one-factor test. Okay? Now, the problem here is for this Harman one-factor test, this is what it is. It's a weak, conceptually flawed procedure. This is what people say about it. But still, everybody is using it, so this is a mistake. If it comes to it where you are doing a quantitative study, and if you have to employ this, do not use Harman one-factor test. Okay? And again, what I'll do is I'll give you the slides. I'll send it to you guys. Share it with others so you have the references and everything, you know, if you have to use it.
So basically, this is equates to original sin.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. Okay? Not that dangerous though. Yeah. Okay. So we are going towards the end of it real quick. So now it's more about method in terms of data collection. What type of analysis you should choose? Again, I'll try to be more neutral here, not only quantitative, and some errors and measurement model tests, stuff like that. Okay. How many of you have heard the word mediation or mediator? Okay, you've heard of it. Even the qualitative researchers may have heard of it, right? Can anybody tell me what is a mediator? No, you.
Ask the lawyer.
I'm not one.
Yeah, PhD guy.
Meeting starts today. Go on.
No?
Now,
It's one person.
It's the way that basically bridges your defense counsel, of course. Yeah, in terms of variables.
So yes, it's somewhat true. It bridges two variables. That's why it's mediator. How would we do it? Yeah.
Right, it's a factor that mediates a relationship between two factors. So, generally speaking, in my field, yes, we do use mediators, but we also have direct relationships. Now, the beauty of PLS, since we're talking about PLS, is that it enables you to do the mediation or test the mediation in such a way that you test the mediator effects in comparison to the direct effects to see if that mediator is statistically significant or not. Of course, Nabdi's going to shoot me now because he doesn't like these things, so I'm going to stop here. But basically, it's a factor that mediates the relationship between two factors.
Okay. So it's like what you said, it's something that is in the middle of two variables, okay? It's a very good definition, but it's not the right definition.
Anyway, in our discipline, I have seen that there are direct relationships again.
Yeah. So what everybody defines it, like what Nandi said, what Nisreen said, it's right, it's completely fine, but you are not telling me the definition, you are telling me the position of mediator. It's true that mediator is always in the middle. That's what it is, right? Mediator. It mediates two different things, so it's in the middle, okay? It's pretty much like when you buy a home, you have a title company that mediates. You give them the money, the buyer gives them the title of the house, and then that's a mediator, right? Or a brokerage or stuff like that. However, it's defined a bit differently. So remember that every variable that is in the middle of two variables, in terms of position, it's in the middle, but you cannot call it a mediator. Everything that's in the middle is not a mediator. However, every mediator would always be in the middle of two variables. Does it make sense? So everything that's in the middle, you cannot call it a mediator for research purposes. Okay? Again, also remember that for mediator, you have to have a hypothesis. So let's say you have this variable and this one, and this is one. You can have a model like this. This will be your hypothesis 1, hypothesis 2, hypothesis 3. And you can test this model completely fine without any mediation. Okay, because it's okay, this is 1, 2, 3. If you want to test mediation, you should have a separate hypothesis which would be H4, and it would say M mediates the relation between 1 and IV and EV. So it would be a separate hypothesis. Now, a lot of PhD students are very interesting, no offense. What they do is they want to impress the examiners, okay? And one good way to impress people is to put very fancy and sophisticated statistics in your work, right? Because not many people understand it, so it shows that, oh my god, it's like, yeah. So many people, what they do is they start with the research and then they realize there's a lot of models, and it's cool to also add mediation analysis in the end, and they do it, which is a problem because you never hypothesized it and it was not your research aim. So in order to have a mediation test, you need to have a hypothesis, because that's what you do, right? You have a hypothesis and then you test it accordingly. And in order to have that hypothesis, you should have it as your research purpose or research question. So that's how it flows. Now, when I say not everything in the middle is a mediator, like in this case, if I do not hypothesize it, it's not a mediator, then how would you know which one is a mediator and which one is not? Right? So I'll go with an example, okay? There are two variables, seawater temperature and that tall. by drowning, right? People dying by drowning. Is there a relation in these two?
Yes, there's a relationship.
Okay, good.
You cannot drown in seriously in the Black Sea, for instance. That's very.
Oh no, that's an exception. That's an exception.
Given there is no relationship at all, you can die by drowning in swimming or your hands. No relationship. It's not. Okay,
Hold on. Let's make it.
Let's see. Let's not the Black Sea. Okay, hold on.
Alright, let's make it easy for everybody to understand. Okay, so just assume that we have these two. This sea is not Black Sea. This sea is the sea near Bournemouth, from where I just came. So people can drown in it. So let's say your seawater temperature and depth. Is there a relation in these two? Time. Like how? So can you explain?
If you think of the Titanic, there are many people who maybe would have survived longer if it wasn't because the water was so cold.
Okay, very good. Very good. So this is what you are referring to. If it's cold water, people are going to get frozen and then they may die, right? Which makes sense. Okay, very good. How about hot water? So normally when you look at the beaches, when do you see more people around beaches? Is it summer or is it winter? It's summer. So when the sea water temperature is higher, there are more people who swim. The more people swim, the more people are going to die. Right? Now what happened here is we made another relation, the more this, the more that, the more this, so we do not know directly here, but if I add one other variable here, then it makes it much more clearer, which means if the temperature will impact number of swimmers, that would impact the depth total, right? In this case, this is a mediator, which is clarifying the direct relationship. If there is no mediator, I mean, if you have a relation where there's something in the middle, but if you remove it, you still understand what the direct relationship is, then that's not a mediator. So mediator always will have a purpose of clarifying the direct relationship. Now, since you guys are in London, it rains a lot, right? Yeah. So I'm going to give you another example, which is easier to understand, and it has nothing to do with the Black Sea. So let's say if we have one variable, and that's rain, and then we have another variable called usage of umbrella, okay? Do you think there's a relationship?
Yes.
What?
Umbrella.
Okay. But I have also seen my kids who run crazy in rain. They are just dancing around. So if there's a relation between rain and umbrella, my kids should use an umbrella, but they don't. It can be age, or it can be your intention to stay dry. I mean, if it's raining and I don't care if I get wet or whatever, I'm not going to use umbrella. So it's rain, intention to stay dry, and usage of umbrella. So again, you add a variable to clarify the position. Okay? So that's what mediator is. So again, the problem here is understanding mediator and also understanding when should you really consider it as a mediator and when you should not. So many people do not understand this thing, they just assume that anything that's in the middle is a mediator, which is not the right approach. Any questions?
Sorry, I missed the part about number of swimmers. What variable is that?
So in the summer, the more people who go to swim, the higher the risk of drowning. And again, also with your case, yes, if seawater temperature, the risk of being frozen or whatever, I don't know how to name that variable, but there should be something in the middle that would clarify that relationship.
In the Cape Town coast, the seawater temperature is warmer in winter than in summer. So what? So that then sort of confounds, or doesn't go with that.
So anytime, it doesn't matter with the season. It matters with the temperature of the water. Right? So, I mean, this is again just an example.
Slightly different question to this. So, let's say, well, let me think of the question. Could there be an exploratory research to identify any mediating variable?
Yeah.
Could that be something
Yes.
to explore about?
Yes. Actually, most of the research where you do not have mediators, you can do an exploratory study to see if there can be any mediators.
Right. Okay.
Like presence of sharks.
What you were going to say? Yes, sir. Okay, so I think let's continue with this so we can finish on time. All right. Yeah, this one it's also important. So when you test mediator, you have to have a test, right? So let's say if you want to look at the impact of one variable on another, you do regression analysis, right? So for mediator, there's a mediation test, and that mediation test was proposed in 1986. And that's the older test which to which Nasreen was, which you were talking about. And this test actually says that in order for this one to mediate these two, there should be a direct relationship. This one.
No, not necessarily.
No, I mean, I'm not saying you said it. I'm saying the older test, Barron and Kenny, was saying that in order to test the mediation, you should have a direct relation as well. This is the previous.
That's not necessarily the case.
It's not necessarily. So the newer one, which is Preacher and Hayes, it says that you don't have to have a direct relationship in order to test a mediation, right? There's a very interesting paper, this one, this Preacher and Hayes, which I think the title is Beyond Barron and Kenny, which is a very interesting paper. But again, there are a lot of people who still are stuck with the older method, which again, I think there's a lot of flaws in it, so there's no point of using that. Sometimes people might ask you, okay, where's your justification on how do you do this, especially with students, because the advisors are one of the most stubborn creatures on the world. I'm not. I'm a very good advisor though. This guy, this Hayes, has a blog, and somebody actually sent him a question saying that, what do I do with my advisor? He keeps pushing me to use the previous method. Okay. All right. Oh, my goodness. Okay, it's gonna come soon. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to put it in a USB and I'll put it there because we're doing it more like wirelessly. Okay, there's something going on with the wireless. Okay, perfect.
Just try clicking on the little PowerPoint image at the bottom of the screen?
Yeah, I did. It's not.
One of the spot isn't working. There you are.
Okay, so yeah.
Oh.
Okay, so mediation, yeah, going back to it. So somebody actually sent him a question about how do I, justify to my advisor. So here's what he answered, and I actually like this a lot, which is this.
Okay. Was this comment or the response, was it provided by you, for example?
No. I cannot do this.
Okay.
Okay. So, just to give you an idea of things are evolving, and it's always a good idea, to move further and see how you should evolve your own understanding of methods. Okay, so the next one is more about SEM, which I'm going to skip through because
We have, I was going to say 10 minutes.
yeah, that's right. I'm going to skip through it.
As well.
Exactly. So this one is very technical, quantitative. So I'm just going to skip through this one.
But only one question on Sam.
Yes.
Is it only for checking the mediation? For direct relation, I think Sam is not as much effective.
For
Direct relation,
yeah.
we can check the usability relation, multiple relations.
Depends on how many variables you have in your model. So if your model is like this, and you are looking at direct relationship, then you can use SPSS, okay? Because you have one dependent variable. But if you have a complicated model, like earlier what I showed you, then you cannot do it with SPSS, because SPSS, you can only look at one dependent variable at a time.
Yes.
In that case, what will happen is you have to split your model into a lot of smaller models. But in research, it doesn't work, right? I mean, everything works together. So that's why you have to do SEM. Okay, so this one I'm going to skip through, which is like this thing. The only thing here, which is very important, that I'm going to say is this. So if you are working with a study where you are doing exploratory factor analysis, right? And then you follow it up with confirmatory factor analysis, you cannot use the same data set for both of them. You have to have two different data sets for it. Because EFA you are doing when you do not know which item belong to which construct. CFA you are doing to confirm whether all items belong to this construct or not. So these are conceptually different things. So normally what happens is you do your pilot test, which should be a larger sample. So normally we see like people do pilot tests with 20, 30 people, 25 people, which doesn't make sense. You should normally do 150 to 200 people, again depending on the context. Use your pilot for EFA if you have to do EFA. If you have to delete things or some items go to other variables, change your questionnaire and then use the changed questionnaire to collect data again and then use CFA. So many people these days what they do is they collect data one time, do EFA and then use the same one for CFA, which doesn't make sense because it's conceptually different. Now sometimes what happens is, let's say you are working for your PhD, you collected data from 600 people and you did EFA and CFA, but before you defend or send your thesis or dissertation for examination, a person like me who is a party spoiler comes and tells you like, whoa, what have you done? It's like wrong. How can you do EFA and CFA on the same data set? In this type of case, what do you do? Like if you've already collected data, you cannot collect data again. Then the best, obviously you have to analyze again, but the approach would be you go back to your original data set, you split it. So make it into, let's say 250, 450, 350, 300, 300, whatever, you split it into two. Use the first one to do EFA, okay? And use the second one for CFA. Now this is not a preferred method.
This is basically far-fetched.
This is just in the case where you cannot collect data again. Because remember that if you are splitting data set, your respondents still answer to the questions looking at the previous questionnaire. So, so it's very important to understand this. Okay, this one I will just go through. Okay, so these are...
Wouldn't you be in danger of living up to Kerr's 1998 work called hacking? hypothesizing after the results are known.
Yeah, harking is very interesting thing. I think it's a very, very bad thing, and many people, they like reverse engineering, okay? I have seen studies where people do all their analysis, and based on their findings, they create their research questions. So, they do everything, then, okay, whichever results are good, I go back and change my questions to match this, which is pretty much harking. You look at all your results, and some people, what they do is they make a complicated model, they run the model, and then they connect different variables in different ways and see which one is the best one.
Wow.
And then after finding the best one, they say, okay, this one was my model, I hypothesized, and so these are bad practices, but it happens.
How do you know which one is better?
Huh?
So you're looking into different sets and working out the data, and then saying this one works. How would you? Not that I want to do that back.
So
Here
here is how it works. Okay. So let's say you have a model with 10 hypotheses. Okay. I'm not going to say which one is connected to which one, but let's say you have a model with 10 hypotheses. You run your model, and then you realize that 8 of your hypotheses are not significant and 2 of them are significant. Now, if I am a person looking at it, normally I'm not having a problem with that, because if you do not find significance in something, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It actually opens door for further research and understanding why is it not right. However, many people are not like this, so they are going to question you. And in many countries, if your hypotheses are not significant, the first thing is people are going to look at you and say, what did you do? What's wrong with you? Something like this, right? So because of that,
it's based on the data.
exactly, it's based on data, right? But you should also understand that you might have done a very serious mistake in your research design, where people couldn't understand what you were asking for. So it's not like completely not your mistake, it can be your mistake. So because of that, what people do is, okay, let's say my 8 hypotheses are not significant. Okay, let's go back, change my model, change the hypothesis here and there, and see how the results are. So after changing, now you realize that 6 of your hypotheses are not significant, 4 are significant. So you have still got a better model compared to the previous one. You go back, play with it more, and now you have like 5-5. So you're like, okay, this is the best I could. Now you go back to your introduction, change your introduction, change all your hypotheses, and then you say this was my research. That's what's harking is. Now, here are some of the recommendations, okay? Very, very important.
Maybe it's fraud. It's called fraud.
Fraud.
It's never been published before.
Yeah, harking is, I have a very good friend who publishes on it very frequently. Herman.
Well, movie producers make it. Movie
That's
makers
movie.
do that all the time, don't they?
That's movie making.
But it's publishing the research.
Research can be
something. It's some new thing.
Academic research.
No, so here, look, my thinking is this, nobody stops you. Nobody stops you of changing your model and testing it, but you should do it in another study. You shouldn't change this study based on what your findings are. Right? So this study, whatever it is, you look at it. Sometimes if your findings are really not good, you don't have to publish it. Actually, you fix it and collect it again and then publish it. So, okay. So these are some guidelines. Again, when I give you the slides, look at it. Some of them are very straightforward. So some of them are like why certain constructs were chosen. So here, you should focus on the importance of the constructs and then include that in your literature. So I'm not going to explain this because it's really straightforward. But what I'm going to say is this. So every time when you are looking at a construct in terms of picking it up, what's very important here is the depth of the conference and the dimensionality of the conference. The depth means whether it's a specific construct or a generic construct. For instance, if I'm conducting a study on, let's say, airline passengers, okay, and I go to the literature, there's tons of questions about customer satisfaction. I pick up one of them, and then I use it for my study. This is a generic construct where I picked it up like customer satisfaction and use it for airline passengers. But there's also a lot of research on airline passengers where there's a specific construct, airline passenger satisfaction. which is really in line with it. So if you remember, I showed you 2 questions about restaurants, where it says that the food I ordered was good, the setting of the restaurant was good. It's a specific construct to restaurant. So if I have to pick up those 2 questions for banking, I may not use them exactly as they are. I'll change them a lot. So instead of changing something which is so specific, I have 2 options. Either I pick up a generic construct, either I go to a banking study and pick up a banking construct, right? So this is how it is. So you have to look at the depth of the construct, whether it's specific or generic. And then the other one is the dimensionality. So earlier, yeah, I think he talked about emotional intelligence. So sometimes what happens is you have constructs that are 2 types. Either they are very simple. So I'm going to give you an example. You go to a conference, you attend a conference. At the end of the conference, I ask you, how was your experience with the conference? It's difficult to say it was good or bad, because really it's difficult. There's so much going on at a conference that you cannot really put it in one word. So that's why sometimes people would say that I really like the speakers, but the quality of the presentations was not very good. The food could have been better. Networking was really good. You know, something like this. We are talking about multiple dimensions of the conference. So in that case, if you have a construct like this, you better use a multi-dimensional construct. Because if you use unidimensional, now imagine if I'm the conference organizer and there are so many moving parts, and you do not have a chance to tell me which part was good, which part was bad, just one question, is it good or bad? You may say bad, where you really were not happy with very small things, right? Yeah, I'm almost done. So that's about that. Oops. Okay. Yeah, and in line with Harking, do not add any hypothesis in your model if you do not have a theoretical support for it. Like, that's what I just explained, right? Do not go back and play and see what's happening. You have to have a theoretical support for anything that you put in your model. Okay, so that's, yeah, this is for the sample. We talked about it. Normally, you should not use a cross-sectional study, which means just go collect data one time and that's it. Normally, you should use a longitudinal study, which is like based on time 1, time 2, time 3, or multiple data sets, like I said earlier. Now, again, going back to, let's say if there's somebody, you cannot collect data again, they just collected one time, now what to do with that, right? You cannot do anything with it. So remember, when you are collecting data, you're actually collecting data from one sample, but there are a lot of sub-samples in your data. There's male and female, there's people younger and older, there are people educated and not educated, there are people from different income classes, right? Sometimes if your data is really specific, let's say here information systems, there are people who are experienced with technology versus people who are not experienced. In organizations, there are people who are working for 10 years versus people who are in their first year. There are a lot of sub-samples in your data. Then the best option, if you cannot collect data again, is to compare sub-samples within your sample. It's like looking at the gender differences, looking at age differences, stuff like that. Which bring more variation into your implications. Okay. If your sample is too small, now there are certain studies where your sample can be very small, right? So how do you define it? So I get this question a lot. What's the magic number for the sample? 100, 150, I hear this a lot. There's no magic number. The best way to do is look at your model. If your model is, so obviously you need more people for a more complicated model, right? If you have a very simple model like this one, you would need a less number of people. So the best option is to use statistical power analysis, which is a tool that's going to give you optimal sample that you need to run that model, right? It's just like, let's say sometimes for my complicated models, I might need 300 people. So as far as I have 300 people, I can run my model and see how it is, right? So that's another thing. For conceptualization, 2 important things. And operationalization, when you pick up the scale, this is what you were asking, right? If you have a lot of scales, which scale do you pick up? So here there are 2 things. One is called sufficiency, one is called contamination. Sufficiency means you have enough questions to cover everything, right? I'm going to give you an example. This is a study somebody did. So this study is like emotions, value, and satisfaction. So when I say emotions, emotions can be positive, negative, right? Because I didn't explain it here. But when I look at the questions for emotion, there are 4. excitement, joy, peacefulness, and surprise. These are all positive emotions. There's nothing negative here. So it means this scale is not sufficient. So every time you pick up a scale, it should be, you look at the sufficiency. Is it sufficient to cover the phenomena? The other one is contamination. Contamination, here are 4. So imagine this is positive emotions. These are 4. If I use 20 positive emotions, which is more like multicollinearity. So you are repeating things too many times. So let's have joy, I put here, pleasant, delight, happy. So happy, pleasant, joy, they are pretty much same stuff. Then you are more like contamination, where you are contaminating the scale, right? Adding stuff that's not supposed to be there, right? So that's about your scales. Yeah, so this one I already explained. Try to, for common method variance, try to make sure that you are doing pre-data collection things. If you have not done them, then you should use a statistical method to deal for common method variance. Mediation, I explained that one was, yeah, this is all CFA, EFA. Okay, so just last couple of minutes. Why do you think we make these mistakes? Like all these mistakes you see, right? Research methods, things about methodology and design and this and that. Why do you think these mistakes are happening? Yes?
Blame the reviewer.
Blame the reviewer?
She forces you to go pick something up.
Okay.
So it's a way knowledge gaps. If you don't know, you just don't know.
Yeah, that's one possible.
So many tests are there,
Absolutely.
and a lot of time you don't know which test is suitable for a particular situation.
I think-
That's why you're making mistakes.
Sometimes one doesn't do enough homework, you just want to start collecting data and doing stuff, and then you're not really taking all the factors and not spending enough time in the planning stage.
Right.
You're getting the scale of data wrong.
This is all correct, okay? Reviewers, you can blame them, obviously, if they are not telling you what mistakes you are making. Not doing enough homework, not knowing what to do and all that stuff. So if you do not know what to do, you can spend more time on doing it, understanding, right? But we don't do that. We do not do enough homework. So I'm going to go one step back and see why we don't have all that. The first thing is this: you publish or you perish. There's a lot of pressure of publishing, like publish, no matter what, publish, right? So now you look at your 1 year where you can publish one very good paper by really doing a lot of homework versus doing 3 papers with a lot of mistakes. People are going to prefer 3 papers with mistakes rather than doing 1 paper with no mistakes, right? That's one thing. The second thing is more like where we are focusing on this one. Replication instead of development. So what we do is most of the times, if I go to my advisor and say like, I have to do mediation test, tell me something, my advisor is going to give me a paper and say, follow this. Right? So many times there are mistakes that are being passed on. So there are mistakes happening and then other people do it just because those were passed on. And why we pass them on? Because we are replicating a lot of stuff.
And I think one of the other reasons as well is that reviewers would not grill us as much if the test has been used in other previous papers. If it's something very new, it's very likely that they'll come back and say, well, if you're going to go for the new one, that's fine, but also use the old one despite how much is being criticized.
Yes.
It's a reality, unfortunately.
So I'm going to cover that also, which I completely agree to. But this point is also there's lack of opportunity to train people. There's not enough these type of trainings happening where people can openly talk about the problems that they face and the mistakes and stuff like that, right? I mean, most of the time when you talk to somebody about a research problem like a mistake, or you think there's a mistake, people are going to say like, just get it done. I mean, why you want to get into this now? You know, so pretty much like that. And then this one is what you are saying. There's a lot of journals and editors and conferences and reviewers who are very stubborn with some stuff that they know, and it's very hard for people to let it go, you know, because things are evolving. So that's stubbornness. And then the last one that I think, oops. Okay, the last one that I think is lack of review papers. Now again, this is discipline specific. In hospitality and tourism, there are not a lot of review papers, and people do not even like them. Like, I recently submitted a review paper to which the reviewer rejected the paper by saying, what's the theoretical contribution? I have no clue how to put up a theoretical contribution in a review paper where I'm reviewing papers. Like, you know, it's difficult. But so what happens with review papers is you look at an entire body of research and then you say, critique it. I think this is wrong or this is right, which can really open the door for discussion for other people in that discipline. And not everybody has got time to really read everything, right? Okay. My summary here is this, and especially for you, okay, and other PhD students if you have, carefully design and redesign your methods, okay? I've heard this a lot about writing, the story. So when you talk to editors, they are going to say, like, when you write your paper, read it again and again. Add more stuff to it until the end. Every time you read it, there will be a mistake, you're going to fix it, but make sure you read it again and again. I say the same for methods. Before you actually start your research, look into your methods again and again. Make a plan and see where can things go wrong. Talk to people, right? Why is it important? Because you see, when you play safe, which means when you go with all the safety nets, people are going to question your uniqueness. Which is like, if you are really doing things that are there, people are going to say, what new do you do, right? What's new in all this? If you go new with new things or with novel stuff, people are going to ask everything else. Like if you really go with something new, then people are going to question everything. Okay? So what's important is look for multiple elements in your methodology, look for things from different perspectives, and talk to experts, talk to people who understand things, whether your advisors like it or not. But talk to them. Just talking doesn't make any difference, you know, so just talk and see how other people think about it. Now, you remember this picture, right? Yes? And a lot of you said this is pretty true. I also think it's true, but I also say that add one or two methodology people here. Like make this one a methodology person and make this one, well, this is too scary, maybe this one. So, you know, something like that, just to make sure that, you know, things are pretty good. And then the last one is this slide that I like a lot, and that's by others' fault, the wise correct their own. So all what I just explained is mistakes that other people have made, you know, based on my experience, reviewing papers and looking at all this stuff. These are mistakes by other people and happened. It's not hypothetically, you know, it's happening and you can also think about it in your own discipline. So just make sure that you are not making these mistakes, okay? And that's it. So that's my email address. If you have any problems with your methods or whatever, reach out to me. I cannot promise that I'm going to answer every single thing because I possibly cannot. It's not possible to do it, but I'll try, you know, and I can connect you to people that I think can help you with anything that you have problem with. All right? Now, just one other thing. So because we said I'm going to do the how to publish thing, right? Which obviously the time is not, it's not possible to do it now. So what I'm going to do is I'll send you a YouTube link where I actually talked about it. It's recorded.
I'll share it.
So you guys can watch that one.
Thank you so
Okay?
much. Any questions?
Yeah, questions.
Right. Anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, one that I would like to mention, I really like the lecture. And this part. But one thing that you mentioned there as well that we miss is like some of us probably research students, you know, the way that we give time and the frequency of this part there is missing in research. So for example, you will have this lecture, for example, with us once in a year or 2 years or something like that. So maybe that frequency is missing. Right? So you kind of, and that will keep you engaged with the whole process. But you know,
Researching.
yeah, and these kind of talks and stuff like that. And it's not happening like, you know, every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, so probably you don't feel a part of the thing. That's one. The other thing is that we used to say a lot about being neutral, you know, unbiased, because we do research. But I think the people who do research, they're probably not very neutral in terms of they probably don't look at the facts and texts. So It's in a number of things, like, you know, a number of factors I can talk about, because research is rethinking, and chocolate stuff. So see, for example, if you, so in every institution, the expectation to do research will be same for everyone, isn't it? But not every person is the same person. They are not at the same level. They don't have the same commitments. They don't teach the same modules. They don't teach the same number of hours, you know. But everything, every sort of communication you will receive is a similar. It's the same thing for everyone. So how do you kind of make that distinction? You know, so it cannot be the same expectation from everyone, right?
So yeah, I think some of this I can answer. Some of them I can tell you what I think about it, but obviously I do not have a lot of say in it. So the first one where you said frequency of stuff, it's true. The more you are exposed to these things, the better you get, right? Now I came here, I did this, but once you leave and then you do not think about any of this, obviously you're going to lose all that, right? And I have a job, so I cannot be here every day doing this. So obviously there are limitations there. What you can do though is what I said earlier. If you get into those groups like that doctorate support group, and then there are a couple of YouTube channels. I started my own YouTube channel very recently. It's very new. It's just 4 or 5 videos on there. But I'm planning to put one video every week, which is stuff like this, you know, that can help people around the world. You know, so anybody can access it. So you can add, you can get into stuff, you know, on these type of channels where you can get information and stuff, but there are also some journals that are specific to research methods. Like there's a journal called Organizational Research Methods. It's a very good journal, and they publish only papers on different research methods. So a lot of stuff that I'm talking about is also getting more data from that journal. That harping is also published in similar journal, right? So you can also get on those type of journals and see what. There's another journal called Quantity and Quality or something like that, which is also looking into methods. So if you get on those type of journals, you will be up to date with the debate that's coming up. Another thing that you can do is go to Google Scholar and also set up some alerts. Pick up some of the scholars who publish on research methods. So every time they publish something, you'll get an alert, and then you can just go and read those papers and see what's happening. So that's your first part of your question. Second part, I completely agree. People are not the same. I can be a very good researcher, but I'll be a terrible teacher, which I'm not. I'm a good teacher. But you know, the people can be good at service, but not good at another thing. So in that type of case, what's important is people who are on good positions in their universities need to talk about this for the, you know, criteria of promotion and stuff like that.
Yeah, sorry, I think I didn't put my question, the second one properly. That was when we are doing this research stuff, we are not looking at the factors equally, or in a balanced way, I would say. So we just kind of throwing stuff the same way to everyone, whereas I don't know whether it's the right question to ask, but I think we are researchers, so actually we need to kind of dig down on these things as well, to make things more kind of suitable. So we should be aware of all these things, you know, before we actually send in this stuff or into this stuff.
Yeah.
I really like, you know, these type of things.
Yeah. Can I just clarify? Is your question there in terms of the research load for staff members, or I'm a bit confused there. So what?
Yeah, me too.
Is it about for example, the expectations from staff members in terms of their research outputs, or is it?
I think it's just your other commitments, for example.
Yeah, but there's just a minimum requirement for every academic, for every research, or whether you're on a teaching scholarship or teaching and research. And as long as this minimum number has actually been satisfied.